This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm here today to talk about our top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. So this is sort of a mid-year point. We've been doing this podcast now for about a year and a half. We started it back in January of 2021, and in that time, we've done close to 100 different interviews. I think it's actually over 100 now in that 18 months. And just this year alone, in 2022, as we come up on the midpoint of the year, which is hard to believe, it's already halfway through 2022, but if we look at the interviews we've done close to 30 interviews so far this year for this podcast, and wide variety of topics we've covered in the show, ranging from anything related to digital transformation, ranging from digital strategy to software evaluation, how to manage system integrators, organizational change management, program management, understanding different technologies, diving into emerging technologies, and understanding the human and leadership aspects of change are just a few examples of some of the threads and topics we've covered on the show over the last several months, and actually since the show's inception back in 2021. So what I wanted to do here in today's episode is really provide the best of so far this year. So these are the top 10 interviews, according to me, quite frankly. It includes my biases, but it also includes some data points that I use to rank these. And largely, I based these rankings on a few different criteria. One is the topics that resonated the most, or the interviews that garnered the most attention, the most views, the most listens, the most engagement from the audience. That's one criteria. Another is just the interviews I liked, the ones I thought that did the best job of unpacking some of the concepts that were most critical and most important to digital transformation. So those are just a couple criteria that were used, probably the two most important criteria. And I did look at metrics for each of these interviews to see, which ones got the most views, and of the ones that I thought were the most relevant to the topics that we covered, which ones are the ones that got the most views and engagement. And that's really how I generated this top 10 ranking. There's a lot of interviews, though, that did not make the top 10 list. And it's almost interesting to look at some of these interviews that did not make the top 10 list. And I'll give you just a couple examples, and then I'm going to actually dive into the top 10. But some of the topics that did not make the list was, workforce management and analytics. That was an interview we had a few weeks ago, or earlier in 2022, with John Heiliger. He was on the show. We had a great conversation about workforce analytics and how to measure and manage workforces. We had Nate Stroher from the Third Stage team, who was on talking about a lot of digital strategy sorts of topics. That was a very good conversation. So those are just two examples of a couple interviews that did not make the top 10, but it just goes to show how difficult it was to really hone it down to these top 10 interviews. And so I'm excited to play you some of these clips. I'm not going to play the entire interviews, but with each of these top 10 interviews, I'm going to play you the highlight from the clip, or sort of the main highlight from the interview. And I'll also reference what episode it came from, so you can go back and listen to that full episode if it's a topic of interest or if you like a particular guest. But this is sort of a flyover view of some of the best of 2022 so far. And by the way, before I get into the podcast, in case you didn't know, or actually before I get into the top 10 list, I should say, in case you didn't know, this podcast is named after a David Bowie song. So just a fun little trivia fact, if you know the song Space Oddity, which is one of the early David Bowie hits. I think it might have been his first hit, actually, back when he was first starting out. He had a song called Space Oddity. He tells a story of Major Tom going up into space, and Major Tom is presumably a fictional character, but he's going up into space, and it's basically the whole song is about him communicating with ground control communicating with Major Tom as he goes up into space and explores space. And if you know anything about third stage, there's a heavy space analogy there with digital transformation being a comparison to a space launch or a space journey, and fighting gravity, fighting inertia, fighting risk, overcoming risk, all that stuff. And certainly if you listen to the song Space Oddity from David Bowie, there's a lot of risk that the main character, that Major Tom, encounters while he's in space. So that sort of brings it all full circle: transformation, ground control, third stage, all that good stuff. So a little fun fact about the backstory of where the name transformation ground control came from. So let's dive into the top 10 list here. And the first topic we're going to cover here the first interview on our top 10 is coming in at number 10, which is an interview we did back in episode number 53 with Marcus Harris, who is an attorney at Taft Law. And Taft Law, and Marcus in particular, is a company that specializes in helping organizations from a legal perspective negotiate contracts. He and I first met actually in an ERP digital transformation related litigation lawsuit, where his firm hired me to be an expert witness in that case, and that's how he and I first met years ago. And so he also does litigation related to ERP failures, digital transformation failures. And so I wanted to have him on the show again. He was on, I think, twice in 2021, and then we had him a third time as a guest in 2022, earlier this year on episode number 53. And he was on talking about how to negotiate contracts with software vendors and system integrators. And he gives some really good advice on things you should be thinking about, some landmines to watch out for, and really understanding some of the nuances and risks of some of these aspects of digital transformation, which is one of the first things that organizations have to deal with, is really understanding what those vendor contracts entail and how it affects their digital transformation, their cost, their risk longer term, the potential business value. All that stuff is affected by the vendor contracts. And in many ways, the trajectory for digital transformation is set when you execute those contracts. You're sort of locking yourself into a certain set of parameters and criteria and assumptions and cost and risk and all that good stuff. And so we had a really good conversation when he was on the show back in episode 53 to talk about vendor contracts, some of the things to be aware of. And let's just cut to the clip here, and we'll play you a little clip from episode number 53 with Marcus Harris talking about best practices with vendor contracts. Moving to the front end here of transformation and sort of setting the tone for a transformation. I guess just to set the context for some of the questions I'll ask you is, it seems like there's so many decisions and criteria and parameters that get defined from a legal perspective, but also just from a pure delivery and execution perspective up front during this whole contract, vendor contract procurement process. But I think a lot of organizations don't really know what to look for, what the risks are, what the pitfalls are. But it's so important because you're sort of baking in what the project is going to be. You're setting the trajectory, you're setting parameters for yourselves, for your vendors, all that stuff. And so maybe just to start, if you could, before I jump into my real questions, is maybe just explain to the audience, if you don't mind, like why is this so important, this whole upfront piece of vendor contracts, procurement, all that stuff?
Yeah, well, I think you touched on it. Really what you're doing through the contract negotiation process and putting the contract in place is you're really setting the tone for how the relationship is going to fold out for the life cycle of the implementation project. So, and really beyond, right? So any kind of maintenance support, licensing, whatever it is, it's all going to be governed by the contract that you negotiate on the front end. The ideal scenario is to have a contract that reasonably anticipates everything that can happen during that relationship and spells out a process for dealing with whatever issue happens to arise. That's a tall order, because I don't think anybody can look into a crystal ball and anticipate everything that's going to possibly happen in the future. But with experienced counsel, experienced consultants, people that have been through this a few times, you're going to set yourself up for a pretty good chance of success if you do the front end work by anticipating all the things where this thing can go sideways, have a contractual process for mitigating the likelihood it's going to happen at all, and when it does happen, know exactly what the process is to deal with it when it arises. My goal is not to and this may sound surprising, it's not to put in place an ironclad contract. And there's one reason for that really is that, I can do that all day, but no one's going to sign it, right? And especially not an experienced software vendor.
Right.
They're going to just walk away and say, your expectations are unreasonable. The goal is to put a contract in place that defines the relationship. It, makes reasonable concessions on both sides. It doesn't shift the entirety of the risk of the transaction to one side or the other. It kind of balances it out in a reasonable way. And ultimately, you should be, as the business owner, the customer, in a position where, something goes wrong, you pull that contract out from your desk drawer and you say, oh, look, on page 7, paragraph 3, we anticipated this would happen, and this is exactly what the vendor's supposed to do. And, they're going to give you a hard time and say, no, we don't want to do that. That's not how things work. And you say, no, here's exactly what's going to happen. That's the goal. That's a successful contract process right there. That's the end result that you want to have, ideally.
It's kind of removing that ambiguity, making things predictable, having a clear, having those clear parameters or guardrails in place for the overall project.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, what you're doing during a contract negotiation, it's really not, from the legal perspective, it's not, I'm not concerned with the price, right? That's what people hire you for. That's what there's other consultants that can say, look, you're not getting a good deal. Attorneys aren't really focused on the financial aspects of the deal. I can kind of tell, just because I've done it a lot of times, if list price doesn't mean anything to me, right? It doesn't mean anything to anybody. You get an 80% discount off list rate, Right. It's not because you negotiated something strongly. It's just, list price is illusory.
Right.
But it really is, to put in place a contract that sets you up for success by governing the relationship, right? You never have as much leverage in that relationship as you do before you sign on the dotted line. And you've got to use that leverage in a way that makes sense for you. And really it's all about risk mitigation. And you've got to ask the tough questions. You've got to make sure that everything is discussed prior to signing, so that you can see where how far apart you are. We talk about functionality gaps, but there's gaps in perception and gaps about expectations, and you want to minimize the likelihood of those coming to bite you in the rear end later. And the only way to do that is through a thorough negotiation process.
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So when we think about you've been doing this a long time and for decades now, and now we're in a new year. 2022 is upon us. A lot of organizations are sort of looking forward to, what are our contracts going to look like? How are we going to negotiate with our vendors? What vendors are we going to bring on board and whatnot? But what are some of the trends you're seeing in the market? What's changed from a contractual or procurement or negotiation perspective, or what is changing? What do you expect to change here in the new year or in the coming years?
One of the things that we continue to see as a focus of contracts is, this whole issue around data security, cybersecurity, data integrity, who's accessing your data. Do you need a DPA, a data processing agreement? And it depends. The compliance with, the new data privacy laws that have been put in place over the last 5 years or so, it's a patchwork quilt, of regulations and laws. I'm just trying to navigate that and figure out, what your issues are and what they aren't, and what your obligations are. It's incredibly challenging. I was on the phone yesterday with an NFL team that's entering into a large ERP transaction, and data privacy about with respect to the protection of the personally identifiable information of their fans was incredibly important. And it's trying to put standard DPAs in place with them, understanding what their risks are, how to mitigate those risks, and what the compliance framework is. What's actually applicable to them as a processor or a controller. So
right.
That's, I think, going to continue to be substantive over the next 12 months and beyond. So you've got to have strategies for understanding how to mitigate those risks, what your obligations are, and what you can reasonably hold your vendor's feet to the fire for. The other thing that we're seeing on a pretty consistent basis is vendor inflexibility with respect to negotiation. It just you try negotiating with Oracle, and it's just you're getting the stiff arm, every which way. It's just there's not a lot of flexibility, and I think it depends certainly on how much money you're spending. what kind of market you're in. I mean, if you're in a strategic market for them, you're a newer customer, they really want to get an inroad into the industry that you're in. Maybe you have more leverage, even though you're not spending as much money. But always you're spending multi-millions of dollars. Things get a lot easier as far as concessions. You're spending under $1 million. Good luck, right? You're not really going to get a lot of concessions for them. One of the other things we see with respect to Oracle in particular is really the push, and it's a continued push to try to finance these lower money deals. And that's almost always a mistake from a customer perspective, because you really take away a lot of flexibility if something goes wrong. If you finance the deal through Oracle's financing arm, and you want to hold back payments, you don't have the ability to do that necessarily, because there's an acceleration clause in those agreements where everything comes due at once, and they hold that over your head, and it becomes very challenging. Those are some of the trends that we're seeing. I mean, I think there's more granular things that we can talk about as far as specific techniques for negotiating, and indemnity and limitations of liability and super caps and that kind of thing. But from with a broad brush, that's really kind of where I see the market going, or where it has been and where it's going to continue to go.
So why do you think that is that some of the vendors are demonstrating this inflexibility? Is it because of cloud solutions or more of a cookie cutter-ish sort of deployment or approach, or is it just that you've got bigger vendors now that are more active, or what do you think's driving that?
Well, I think it's kind of both. I mean, I think they're really incented to get these deals done quickly, right? And a long, drawn out negotiation process doesn't serve that need. They're really going into kind of the SMB space. You look at Oracle with NetSuite, those are smaller deals. And so their desire to negotiate a smaller deal is just gone. And the mantra that they keep repeating is, look, this is a cookie cutter cloud solution. Everybody gets the same thing, and you don't need to negotiate it, because everybody gets the same. Our business model doesn't really support kind of these one-off concessions, and that's not really true. Okay. First of all, everything's negotiable. It just depends, on what kind of leverage you have and how much they care about that customer relationship. But at the same time, I mean, it really is something that you've got to deal with, and you've got to have experienced attorneys on your side and experienced consultants that know, what's a reasonable ask right now in this environment? What can you get? What's important? I mean, you don't want to spend, time and money negotiating things, negotiating for contingencies that are very unlikely to happen, right? I mean, you want to get the most bang for your buck out of your contract negotiation with the goal of mitigating risk. And, if you're only going to get, 5 things, make them count, right? Right. So yeah, but to answer your question specifically, because I'm not sure I have, is I think it's the size of the deals, right? It's this cookie cutter approach to these transactions, and it's leverage. Basically, if you don't have leverage, there's no incentive for them to make any kind of serious concession. Their excuse is, it's a cookie cutter transaction. It's a SaaS transaction. You're in the cloud. It's a single offering to all of our customer base, and there can't be any one-offs. That's the push. But, a lot of that's not really true. So,
right. All right. That's a great conversation with Marcus Harris, talking about vendor contracts and how to negotiate vendor contracts, what to be aware of, some of the pitfalls to watch out for. If you'd like to hear that complete interview, go back to episode number 53 of this podcast, Transformation Ground Control. You can find that full interview there. And we spent close to an hour, if not maybe a little bit longer than an hour, talking about that topic. So there's a lot more we didn't cover here in this clip, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what we covered in that full conversation. So when we come back from a break, we're going to come back with our number 9 interview in our top 10 list. And it's going to be the first of a few different consultants that are in the top 10 list. This is with Khalid Maurice. I'll tell you what it's about here in just a second. But first of all, we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, I'll get into that number 9 interview in our top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71, which is the top 10 interviews of this podcast in 2022 so far. We're counting down the top 10 interviews that, in my opinion, are the most relevant to digital transformations, the most important content and knowledge that you need to know as it relates to digital transformation. And it's also based largely on the level of engagement and the amount of views that these episodes and these interviews achieved when they were first published way back when. And when I say way back when, I mean in early 2022, which was just a few weeks or months ago. So we had Marcus Harris in at number 10, talking about vendor contracts. Coming in at number 9 was a new format for an interview that I had never done before, but I wanted to try it out with one of our consultants on our team at Third Stage. And this was with Khalid Maurice, who's actually a director of strategy and transformation in the U.S. office of Third Stage Consulting. And the reason it's a different format is I wanted to have a consultant on the show just to ask them questions and sort of put them on a hot seat. Just ask them questions about their career, what it takes to succeed, what makes digital transformation succeed. And rather than focus just on one narrow topic, I wanted to cover a pretty broad topic, but sort of unscripted, go through a number of different angles with the guest. And so this is the very first time we'd done it, and actually it was highly successful. It was very engaging. We did it in a live stream format, which we streamed to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And by the way, if you haven't already, be sure to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn and or YouTube, because in those two formats, you'll get an alert every time. If you're connected to me, you'll get an alert every time I go live. And I try to do live streams typically once a week, except when I'm on vacation or if I have extensive travel. But in most cases, I'm doing these live streams once a week now. But this is one of the first live stream formats where I really just had this consultant hot seat format, where we put a consultant in the hot seat and just fire away with a bunch of questions, and we encourage the audience to do the same too. And as you'll hear in this interview, we started to get a lot of audience questions, and we just had no idea where the conversation was going to go. And Khalid's a perfect person for it because he's really good at rolling with the punches, and I think I am too. So we sort of, between the two of us, just rolled with the punches, rolled with the crowd here on the questions and topics they wanted to cover. So this is from episode number 62 of Transformation Ground Control. This is the Consultant Hot Seat with Khalid Maurice, episode number 62. Let's cut to the clip right now. When you look at your finance and real estate background, I know you may try to blame me for this, and I think you already did, but what made you shift from finance and real estate to consulting? I know that was around the time you and I met, and then I think I may have been involved in trying to convince you to do consulting at the time, but what ultimately led you to decide that, hey, I want to try this consulting thing way back when?
Well, originally it was opportunity. The opportunities were thin, and it is just the real estate market was extremely thin, and I wasn't banking on that. You don't foresee a collapse of an industry. And, when that Lehman Brothers, trigger sort of happened and the financial world started to, sort of shrink in that way, it was a dramatic impact on the real estate market. There was no construction projects. There were no real estate projects. I had one real estate development opportunity, and I also had another quasi opportunity that I was working through coming out of DU, and both opportunities weren't that great, and the options were sort of getting thin. So it was a real opportunity to kind of do some consulting. I was looking for that in that I needed something, and I didn't really expect to have longevity in what it was. Funny enough, the link between us and kind of getting in the consulting world was built around finance and the need at that time. You kind of had this project and you really needed some financial acumen. You needed someone to be a liaison for the finance group. You needed someone to talk to those people who understood their language. And since that was my background, that part was easy for me. That's kind of the way it started. But what I learned was IT and real estate have a lot of parallels as it relates to project management. You can really run. A lot of real estate projects run almost like a waterfall, implementation. And so when I sort of got submerged into the rhythm of technical development, it almost felt familiar. It felt a lot of the things I love about real estate development is nothing is there, and you're working through a development cycle to sort of build something. You're working, whether it's a blight zone or a vacant land or an unused building, sort of you get an opportunity to change something. And the same is happening on technology. Nothing is there. You're sort of designing from scratch. And so you're building, and there's so many sort of indirect hidden ramifications as it relates to business processes and the links there that you're making a significant change in the application of a business, the function of a business. And that part for me was thrilling. So I ended up getting a lot of thrill out of working with technical projects and accomplishing or completing some of these implementation deliveries in the same way that, and it was a shorter cycle because real estate will take you years. Technical development can be shorter cycles depending on what you're doing. So that's kind of, I guess, what sort of changed. So when the real estate market came back around, I kind of was like, I'm good. I kind of can do this. I kind of enjoy where I'm going with career and just sort of start to do some real estate stuff on the side.
Yeah, it's a good balance for sure. And I think it's a good reminder how important that real world experience is and that real world understanding is to be a good consultant.
Yeah.
And before I jump into a sort of a career related question or a follow-up career related question, I want to just turn back to the audience here and just sort of get to some of the comments we have here. I had asked the question, where are you all joining from today? And a lot of you commented. And just to give everyone a sense of where people are joining from across the 4 or 5 live streams that we're streaming to, we've got someone from Malcolm from the UK, Photon from London, Jerry from Toronto, Kyler's joining us from Denver, an unknown user from Johannesburg, South Africa, Ed from Ghana, Deborah from France, Parisa from Parker, got someone from the Netherlands, Charlotte, London, Paris again, Toronto. So a lot of global audience here today. So really appreciate everyone joining. We also have Sam Graham joining from Spain, and Sam's one of my favorite guests because he's very engaged with our content. And also wanted to give a special hello to Christian, who's joining from Vietnam. This is his first time listening to a live stream. So thanks for being here today, Christian. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope we live up to your expectations. Thanks for trying out one of our live streams for the first time. And then here's just an interesting question that you might, or it's not really a question, it's more of a comment that you might find interesting, Khalid, from YouTube. I want to get into real estate development too, but want to build my career in consulting first and save up my income. Is that sort of what you did? Did you kind of use consulting as a way to generate income that you could then invest in real estate? Or I don't want to get too far into the real estate world, but
I mean, kind of, it definitely was. Consulting income was good. It was different. I was the most I made when I started to go in consulting. And if you're smart about your finances, you can save a little bit. So that happened. I mean, the real estate market is a lot different now than it was then. So I think it was a lot easier to do more of certainly the kind of investments I was doing or the moves that I was making real estate wise then. But now it might be a little bit harder. But yeah, you certainly can do that. It will just replace consulting with anything, right? You can save, kind of make plans, long-term plans to sort of save to get to a certain amount and then invest when you sort of reach your target or you have enough to sort of play in that sandbox.
Yeah, yep, that's good advice. And maybe another question for the audience here is, what field are you in? Are you a consultant? Are you, do you work for industry? What industry are you in? I'd love to hear from all of you sort of what you do, just to give us a sense of what sorts of industries you all work in. So just drop in the chat if you don't mind. What is it you do? What industry are you in? What's your role? What are you looking to do? Anything you want to share with us would be super interesting and helpful there. So back to the questions I had, and then I'll shift. I'm going to kind of go back and forth between questions I have and then questions from the live audience here. The question I had is, how is working at a company like Third Stage different from working at some of the really big consulting firms? And you didn't mention any. I don't think you mentioned specific names, but you've worked for a couple of the really big, larger, well-known consulting firms, and we're a smaller consulting firm of 50 people versus, 50,000 or hundreds of thousands of people that work at some of these bigger firms you've worked at. So how is it different, working at Third Stage or a smaller firm like Third Stage versus one of the big guys?
I think it's different in two major ways. Well, potentially three, but I think two significant. One is the kind of client. So the clients that we work on here at Third Stage, even our large clients, are very different than the kind of clients that you'd work with, like in a Big Four. Once you're in the Big Four world, your clients are ginormous. They're almost little governments, and the projects are extremely complicated as a result. And you're on these huge teams where one project might have 40, 50 people kind of working, and it turns into a subculture on the project itself, to where you got to deal with your own, just like you have to deal with sort of the client. And so there's a degree of complexity there. There's a degree of culture there that can be, those projects are long, and it can, in some cases, be toxic. In other cases, sort of, it pushes you because there's a certain level of complexity that extends beyond the application's bandwidth. Sometimes those choices are bad. So you might have an application that you're trying to build is really not a good fit for that organization. And so the projects are just all complicated. Like, they're just all extremely complicated with, just tons of difficulty around with respect to trying to fit, a square peg in a circle or something like that. So you have challenges there. And I think you also here, with a smaller company, you have more engagement. So I think the engagement points, at larger companies are different. You don't have the same opportunity to build the kind of relationship with a client. Our clients here at Third Stage are, we just have great relationships, and it's not really specific to like one person. It'll just be, most of the projects that I've been on here at the small level, you get an opportunity to really talk a client through, to really work with the client through their decision-making process and really help them get to where they need to be, because that's the end target. It's like we're all pushing in a window here that sort of lends to client making such and such type of decision. And it's not really like that with large companies. You don't get those opportunities. It's not about engagement. It's about reaction. So they're very, very different experiences. But if you're more into relationships and you're more into end game and benefit to the client, then the smaller kind of consulting world kind of works more. So for me, it's more satisfying than kind of with the larger companies where you're just submerged in politics and grievance and bureaucracy and complexity, and you just feel like you're fighting a battle every single day.
Yeah, and you and I both have experience with some of the big firms, but your experience is more recent and probably more relevant. And I think you spent more time at these larger firms than I did. I didn't last very long, so All right, that was Khalid Morris in the consulting hot seat from Transformation Ground Control episode number 62. So if you want to hear more of that interview, if you want to hear the complete interview, which lasted over an hour in totality, you can find that in episode number 62 of Transformation Ground Control. You can go back and listen to that on YouTube or on whatever audio podcast platform you might be listening to this podcast. So we're going to come back after a quick break. We're going to shift gears and move out of the consulting hot seat, and we're going to bring on another external guest we had on the show, another industry peer, to talk about alternatives to big ERP vendors and what some of the considerations are and what some of the options are you have in the marketplace. So before I give you a little bit more of a description of what we're going to cover in that clip, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Transformation Ground Control's countdown of the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. This is the top 10 countdown of the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far here at the midpoint of the year. We're kind of looking back on the best interviews we've had so far. And one thing I do have to say is I do think that as the show has gone on, I think we've done a good job of bringing on more diverse clients or guests, I should say, which included some of our clients, but also included some of our consultants, included some industry peers. We even went so far as to have a couple competitors on the show throughout the recent episodes. So we really try to broaden the purview of not only the topics we cover, but just the different viewpoints that are so important to making these transformations successful. We certainly have a pretty diverse team here at Third Stage Consulting. We've got 50-some consultants and counting worldwide in 4 different offices. But we're also looking outside the organization, too, to look at others and get their perspectives on digital transformation. And that's the case here with number 8 on our list of top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. This interview, going back to episode number 58 of this podcast, was with Dan Aldridge, mispronounced his name there, Dan Aldridge of Priority Software. And he was on the show to talk about alternatives to the big ERP vendors. And we really wanted to dive into understanding, especially for larger organizations, what are your options? Are you sort of beholden to SAP and Oracle and maybe Microsoft Dynamics? Or are there other technology options out there that could be viable for you? And what are some of the pros and cons of going with a big ERP vendor, a big well-known ERP vendor like SAP or Oracle? And what are the downside risks of that? And same with, lesser-known software solutions. What are some of the pros and cons of that? So we really wanted to give a complete view as you're considering potential software options of what some of those pros and cons and what those comparisons might be. So again, number 8 on our list of top 10 interviews of 2022 so far is with Dan Aldridge, talking about alternatives to big ERP vendors, back from episode number 58. Let's roll the clip. What do you think, in general, what do you see as some of the pros and cons of just migrating to one of those bigger known name brands, if you will, those household names like SAP and Oracle? What are the pros and cons of sort of going in with those options as your vendor of choice?
So obvious pros would be market awareness, lots of companies, references, and things where they're running it. They tend to be the larger enterprise guys that have been around since mid 90s or even in some cases 80s. So there's a perception, at least, that these are very stable systems that, they've had a lot of successes in the past, and maybe friends and C-levels tend to favor the big enterprise systems if they're larger companies because of reputation and because of success stories. But that's sort of the pros. And then, it's like they used to say about IBM, right? You can't go wrong if you go with IBM, and I think the same can be said for SAP or Oracle. But reality, as it, is not exactly like that. So the span of it is potentially huge. The cost is sometimes prohibitive, and you got an on-premise system that gets locked in and things like that. So the pros would be the name recognition, the lots of successes, but the cons would be also lots of instances where they ran long and they, had trouble after they went live, maybe shutting down business at a very extreme.
Right. Yeah, you remind me of one of my favorite counter phrases to the whole nobody ever get fired for hiring IBM, or, insert big company name here, Accenture, Deloitte, SAP, Oracle, whatever. The only problem with that is you may agree, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I can name a lot of people that have been fired for picking one of those big name vendors. So
and they put it on their resume and they move to the next one, right? So you're C-level.
Yeah, and it's such a incestuous industry too, that once you're in a vertical, whether it's SAP or Oracle, or you're working with one of the big system integrators, you tend to stay in that space, and so you tend to drink the Kool-Aid and perpetuate a lot of the same strengths and weaknesses of that solution. So I think that's a good point you bring up there. Okay, so and I'd be curious too, from the audience here listening with us live, what are, if you've been through an ERP evaluation, or if you have experience with systems other than those big names that I've mentioned so far, what are some of the systems you've worked with or familiar with? I'd love to hear from the audience here. So maybe just drop in the chat what ERP systems are out there besides SAP and Oracle, let's just say, and Microsoft. Let's pick those three: SAP, Oracle, Microsoft. I think we all agree those are pretty well-known names. But outside of those three, who are some of the other players in the space that should be on people's radars? I'd love to hear the audience questions, and certainly we'll ask you that same question too, Dan. So before I get to your answer to that question, though, Dan, I guess just to take that previous question one step further, or sort of shift it a little bit, instead of talking about the big name vendors, the pros and cons, what about the other vendors in the market, which is, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of other vendors besides the three that we mentioned. What are some of the pros and cons of working with a potentially lesser known, but still potentially viable product?
Well, the pros are that, it may be a case of just name recognition is not there, and a really, really good system you just haven't heard of them. I mean, for example, Priority is an Israeli-based company. We have offices all over the world and customers all over the world. But in Israel, we're essentially the SAP of Israel, if you want to say. Everybody knows us. We are the majority of the market there. It's a really good software package. We're all cloud. We do have the on-premise capability. So, but we're mostly cloud, and we're heavily cloud. So we have global implementations that we want to do on AWS and, implement everywhere. So with a company with a global footprint that's not the huge, and they can't afford the huge vendors, it's a really good option. Very well priced. Like I said, heavily cloud. And that's the way the market's going. Really nice capabilities in the areas of workflow. So I think the ones that are cloud vendors, a lot of times the workflow is easy to use. It's very low code, no code type of arrangement, where you don't have to program like some of the big ones. You have to program those kinds of workflows and things like that. So those can be some really good advantages. And a huge thing is just time to implement. We're talking 2-3 months in some cases with a small to medium sized business on a good ERP cloud package. So if you're dealing with it, because it comes up on the cloud, the versions are upgraded, customizations come along with it. It's quite easy to implement, and it's easy to use too. I mean, a lot of the bigger ones are complicated and, busy screens and all kinds of things like that. So it's easier for user adoption. And you talk a lot about this, and you're absolutely right. In change management is a lot easier with a smaller package, maybe a lesser known package, but a really good solid one. And I think if they're running on AWS, for instance, that's the way we run, Microsoft backbone, and you don't have to maintain any of the databases or anything like that. You don't have to have a big IT staff. And a lot of the users can configure things like reports and workflows and things like that. Simple to use, workflow tool is a huge thing. And a lot of the lesser known ones will have that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that flexibility, ease of use, change management, all that stuff. I mean, those are really good points that I agree with you on that. So given that there are these other options in the market that maybe they're lesser known, but they still are viable and they have strengths in many cases that some of the other bigger ERP systems don't have, why is it that so many organizations get enamored by the big names? Is it as simple as what you said before, which is no one ever got fired for implementing A, B, or C, or is there more to it? Or would you add to that list of why organizations become sort of blindly drawn to those systems?
Yeah, I think it's references, and they know of other companies that have implemented it, and so they feel more secure in that. But it's not necessarily the case. But I think that our main issue, or the main issue of a lot of the sort of second tier down, is that brand awareness. Simply, we've been around since 1986, and dominate the market over there. And there's a lot of other, companies also second tier that are like that, that are just unknown, because it's a big deal to have a massive marketing machine, and have Gartner and, people like that behind you in that upper quadrant. It stays pretty stable, as It's SAP, Oracle, Microsoft are all in that top right magic quadrant. And then, maybe the second tier doesn't get the same sort of consideration from the big. And when you're dealing with Gartner, you're dealing with larger companies that they are only kind of looking at that upper quadrant, right? So they're not necessarily looking at the ones that are even just slightly down. So it's kind of reputation. It's kind of what the analyst firms like the Gartner say about it. And it's just safe, or
Right.
It's perceived as safe, which is kind of interesting, because if the time to implement is so huge, as the things that will dictate whether it's a failure or a success is the time to implement. The cost can be staggering. And, if you're implementing it in a sort of a modular way, instead of some of the lesser known ones that have the whole footprint, including e-commerce and ERP and MES and all the things that link to it through APIs, it's a much more, it's not a modular approach that some of the big ones take, right? So you might implement purchasing and accounts payable, right? But the other pieces are not there yet. So they're doing it in phases, and it takes a long time and a lot of consulting resources. You're usually dealing with a partner, whereas, some of the smaller ones, they do their own implementations, that they do their own product development, and you get a much more personal experience, if you will. And you get care. We're not, for instance, we're not taking people in the US. We're dealing mostly with our own implementations, with our own team. We have some very good partners, some big partners, and some small that can do implementations. But in general, we're not taking it and putting it off to a VAR and saying, put it over there and forget it. So,
Right.
and I think it's not just us, but it's some of the lesser known ones that really have to prove themselves. They have to have a personal touch. They have to have support that, is very responsive and things like that. And not pushed off to a VAR,
Right. So in your career, then, what was it that drew you personally to these non-household name products? Not that they're, a lot of people have heard of Priority Software and Infor and some of the other systems you've worked with over the years. But what was it that drew you personally to the let's call it the smaller, not small, but smaller software vendors?
Yeah, so it just kind of transpired that way. When I joined Bond, I was recruited. I got an MBA, and I was recruited right out of school, essentially. And I had a finance background, and I was recruited by Bond. Bond was sort of new in the US, and they were sort of the Dutch SAP, if you will. So they were very exciting. They were growing really fast. They just landed Boeing. We had Carrier. We had all these sort of enterprise level manufacturing companies. And so I wanted to join the up and coming one. They used Jan Bond, who's the founder. He always used to say, "We're number 2, but we're the best."
Right.
You know, and I wanted to join the up and coming one, and it just so happened that that one was the one. And also, I'm fascinated, and I have been for 25 years that I've been doing this. I love manufacturing, so I was drawn to their kinds of clients, and I got to visit many large enterprise customers at that time. And first thing I would do is go to the shop floor. So I was a finance guy, so I did cost accounting and everything. And they'd say, go up to the finance office. And I'd say, no, I want to go down on the floor and see how you build this thing, because I was just fascinated with it. And then I kind of fell in love with both ERP, which I still do today, and manufacturing companies in particular. So that's how I got into it. And then, so it just so happened that Infor bought Infor Global Solutions, which is kind of like that next, just right underneath Enterprise. And it's in your Battle of the Titans back when you were I think you still do that, Battle of the Titans. Yeah. So it's like number 4, right? So they bought Bond, and they have a product called Infor LN, which is strictly manufacturing, strictly enterprise level, pretty much. And I developed a consulting firm in that, and I grew a consulting firm, and I just loved everything about it. So again, they were this next tier down. And then finally, when Priority bought my consulting business in 2016, I get my dates messed up.
Couple decades off there.
Yeah, 2016, I had the opportunity to build another one, here in the U.S. And that was a very exciting, having built a couple businesses and done exits before. It was a very exciting proposition. And I saw Priority as this kind of like the Bond, it's the next one, up and coming, a lot of investment recently. And that was very exciting to me.
Right. Yeah. All right, that was a clip of an interview with Dan Aldridge back in episode number 58, talking about alternatives to the big ERP vendors. Be sure to go check out that episode if you want to hear the complete interview, because we covered a lot of stuff that we didn't feature in this highlight reel here. So thanks for being on the show, Dan, and that was a great interview. And speaking of interviews and kind of a preview of what's coming up after a break, we're going to move on to number 7. And we're going to totally shift gears, move away from technology and software focus, and move into the first of a few different interviews that are focused on the human side of change, and more specifically, the psychology of change. I'll tell you who that is when we come back from a quick break. That'll be number 7 on our list. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71, the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. This is the top 10 ranking of the top interviews of 2022 so far. We've had 3 great interviews so far. We're up to number 7 on our top 10 countdown. And this is the first of a few different interviews that relate to the human side of change and relate to organizational change management. And for this particular topic, I was very interested in this person and having her on the show, because she's not just a technical consultant. She's not a technology person. She knows technology really well, but she comes at it from the human side of change. And more specifically, she comes at it from the human side of change within academia. So she works at Colorado State University. Her name is Christina Serrano, and she is a professor at Colorado State University in the MIS, or the IT department, and teaches courses there related to IT. But one of her main areas of focus and the way she views the world is in many ways similar to mine, in that she views it from a human first perspective, although she comes at it from a deeper psychology understanding. So we wanted to have her on the show to talk about the psychology of change and digital transformation, looking at culture, individual humans, how they tick, what makes them accept change, what causes them to resist change, what's going on in their heads, how do we overcome what's going on in their heads to navigate that change. And so this is a great interview that I really enjoyed doing. I learned a lot from this, as I did with all the interviews that are in the top 10 list, which, by the way, is another thing that I use to sort of subjectively rank these, is if I learned a lot from the discussion, or if it's something that even I didn't feel like I didn't know a lot about, and it was particularly helpful, I rated those interviews higher than others. So this is, again, number 7 on our list. This is The Psychology of Digital Transformation with Christina Serrano from Colorado State University. Let's roll the clip.
This is a really broad question that could go a million different directions, and I fully acknowledge it. It may not be fair as a first question or a first real question for you, but I'll ask it anyway and see if we do maybe a flyover view or a summary. But when you think about the time you've spent in IT and the research you've done as in the world of academia, what are some of the biggest takeaways or lessons that you have from, the things you didn't know 20 years ago when you started doing this stuff till now? What are some of those biggest lessons learned or takeaways from your research?
Yeah. So I'm a big picture thinker like you. So I think I might start more at the big picture level,
Sure.
and then where it's brought me today. And so, I started my PhD in 2006. In the very first year of my PhD program, we have to learn a lot of fundamentals about research, about our discipline. And so, my discipline being information systems. And a lot of people confuse information systems with computer science or, computer engineering, and don't really understand the difference. And where I am right now, it's actually, my department is computer information systems. So it makes it even more confusing. But what was really clear, in that first year of my PhD program is understanding, of course, what is information systems as a discipline? What does it mean? And our discipline is essentially captures the combination of people, processes, and technologies, and how they all have to come together, work together to manage information to achieve organizational goals. And, ideally shared goals, right? is what we want. Still, at that time in 2006, the field as a whole was a bit disrupted. Around that time, it was after the dot-com bust, and there were declining enrollments, not just in information systems, but also computer science and other computing fields. And so we were all kind of in this identity crisis, really trying to understand, how can we remain relevant and serve the needs of the future. So in my field, there were a slew of publications around that time, or they had come out a few years earlier when I had started the PhD program. So they were still fairly fresh. And it was kind of, who are we? What kind of things are we supposed to teach and publish? The battle was really more of this holistic information systems. Are we all of this? Because, isn't that more management? Isn't that psychology? Isn't it all these other disciplines? And so we did really hone in on the tech. I think that's what really won the day in that feud about who are we as a field. And so subsequently, every paper you submit to a journal that about your research, there is this question: where's the IT artifact? Are you talking about IT at all? Because if not, maybe desk reject. We don't want to hear it. And I get that, I get that in terms of in a business college, we have to differentiate ourselves from management, from, other disciplines. My sense now, all these years later, is it was a pretty big mistake for our field to take that turn, because it's really in the holistic space of people, processes, and technology, and how they have to work together synergistically in a really careful dance, almost like a marriage, that's where innovation really takes place. Once you take the IT out of the people and the processes and try to look at it alone, you miss out on, a lot of the things that your firm is trying to do, right? When you're talking about these major organizational IT implementations, it's not just about the IT. In fact, it's usually the IT is not the problem. Usually, it's usually right in the people and the processes in that space. And unfortunately, I do feel a lot of researchers who have been responsible for kind of, researching this and teaching it and innovating in this space, have done, exactly what industry has done. And that's look at the tech, kind of, and not look at the whole picture.
Yeah, it's easy to become enamored by the technology and focus on bells and whistles and innovations in the pure tech space without looking at the people and process.
Absolutely. I mean, we still will look at things like tech's impact on organizational performance, and our outcome variables are still very relevant to a business. It's just, we're not looking at our models holistically to account for a lot of the people and processes too, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a good point, and that's a lot of what we want to talk about, especially the technology and people in particular. I think that's a lot of what we'll cover here today. Of course, processes fit into that as well. But in speaking of that, I guess just to kind of shift gears and maybe dive into that a little bit more, part of your research, I know, focuses on how IT impacts individual identities and cultures. Just what are some of your high-level observations or thoughts or learnings in that area in terms of how tech affects or transformation affects, we'll call it digital transformation affects individual and identities and cultures and vice versa as well?
Yeah. So, when I first started to do research in the organizational space, I was really interested in organizational culture. And so I started a study. It's a longitudinal case study. This was actually looking at libraries because at the time, it was 2007, I had access to a particular case, a library that had been built and open, and it has no books. It was intentionally designed to be a bookless electronic library, still a physical space, but looks very different when you walk into it. And that actually meant everything. So we were looking at culture, in terms of how did the librarians adjust to this, and what does it mean in terms of, their culture as an organization in this bookless library. But what we actually found was, when I say we, I have one collaborator at the University of Georgia, Dr. Maurice. We found was that their identities, within the culture space, identity really became a prominent theme in their identity threats and how they responded to those identity threats. So, culture is very important, but I think where my research has taken me is that within the culture space, identity is almost everything, because it deals with who we are as human beings, even in the workspace. Who are we as a librarian, if I'm a librarian, and the threats to that. I found that, we all respond to identity threats. We all have usually our default is some sort of defensive or protective type of response to start. And that's exactly what they did as well. They were really trying to say, hey, we're still relevant in this space. We're not going to be one of these groups that gets sucked into de-skilling because of technology. We want to make sure we're still relevant. But no matter what they did, they could not combat just the misperceptions of the people they were serving. So it didn't matter how often they put up, say, read posters, for example, of celebrities reading books in the building. It didn't matter how often they had a portable bookmobile for checkout, or all the things that they tried to do to say, hey, we're still librarians and this is a library, so please use it like a library instead of a computer lab. It just didn't work. It didn't work. They try to even, change the desktops on the computers to be more like, hey, you're in a library, but their patrons still looked at them like directional assistants at the desk. Would still ask, where's the bathroom, where's the stapler, and these are people with master's degrees or higher. They are very skilled in their expertise. So what we found is that when the masses kind of when it becomes imbued more in the societal culture, because this wasn't the only place where it's becoming digitized and as a library, and you're now going to databases, right, to look at research. You're not pulling books and journals from the shelves and photocopying anymore. That's just not the behavior that the patrons are engaged in. So when that happens, there's really no stopping the train. It doesn't matter what, as an organization, you try to do to say, hey, we want to resist this, or say, it's still this old model, or, so what they had to do was essentially embrace it. They just had to. They had to make it a part of who they are. So they had to adapt their identity to this new technological landscape, because that's the only way to stay relevant. And even though this was a case study, a longitudinal case study with a library and librarians, I do think the lessons gleaned from that case study are generalizable. The way that consumers, the way that it's just all baked into our societal culture, technological adoption, there's no stopping that train, really. I think organizations just have to embrace it, have to respond to it, have to understand the employees that they onboard that are even younger generation. It's different. There's a different culture. Yeah. And so culture, identity, it's all very much tied together.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, Sam Graham on LinkedIn has an interesting related question, which is, to what extent is organizational culture affected by the culture of the country that it is in? For example, he worked in a country where it's considered rude to say no. And so how do you navigate, some of those geographic cultures? Because I think what you're talking about is more just the culture of an organization, or the individual trace of a individual. But how does a geographic culture affect all this?
Oh, for sure. And I encourage Sam to take a look at, there's a website on, this was actually national culture. So I think that's what he's talking about, though, country culture too. Hofstede is a big name in that space. And there are researchers who will take some of his research with a grain of salt, but that's, any research, truly, anything that's produced by humans, you know that there's going to be some flaws in it. But if you look up Hofstede national culture, you'll find that it's even searchable. It's a really great website because you can compare national cultures as well. So for example, it would put United States as a highly individualistic, that's in our culture. It also says that in the United States, we have more of a short-term orientation instead of a long-term orientation. So that even filters into how we have quarterly reports and shorter reporting times for some of our goal settings. But there's these lots of different dimensions, even masculinity to femininity, and that's why some of this has been questioned, but it's been research out there for decades, and so I would encourage them to check that out. But it does definitely have some impact, for sure. even in the pandemic, we saw that, right? I think that, some societies that were just inherently more collectivism in their national culture, the way that they responded compared to countries that were much more individualistic in their culture, was just totally different, right? I don't know that there's a whole lot we can do to change, something as big as national culture. But what Sam is saying is like, it's considered rude to say maybe no in a culture. I mean, I think all we can do is kind of more educate ourselves and ask questions, that's all I have for that. But yeah.
Well, and this kind of builds on a point that you just mentioned as far as one of the dimensions of culture with masculinity and femininity. And this question is from Kyler on LinkedIn, who asks, in honor of National Women's Day, which I didn't know it was National Women's Day. So good to know. Thanks, Kyler, for pointing that out. And building on identity, how is women in technology shifting and cultural misperceptions transitioning?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if we're seeing a huge increase in women, flooding to STEM fields yet, but there definitely has been an uptick in efforts, in recruiting and trying to be more mindful of what are the barriers. Even at CSU, the computer science department and my department, computer information systems, we received a joint grant through Northeastern University. It's from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to increase, women enrollment in our programs, so our concentrations, our certificate programs. I mean, there's more awareness about it. I don't know yet if we've totally untangled all of the barriers truly. What are the real reasons that are preventing women from maybe even choosing this as a concentration or a career, but also retention. So keeping women in these fields is also difficult if they choose it to begin with. That they'll tend to leave, so turnover can be high. It's getting better. That's all I can say. It's getting better. We're working on it. I hope to see a lot of improvement in this area in the next, hopefully, 10 years.
And I imagine it's a lot of variation in different parts of the world and different cultures of how far that's come along versus not. And maybe in 10 years, we get a little bit more even in terms of how we've evolved there.
I think so. I mean, what we're finding is that the interventions that we would implement to increase women enrollment actually just increases enrollment, period, across the board, across all demographics. So I think the barriers preventing women from choosing these careers are also preventing a lot of other people, whether they're women or not, from choosing these careers. A lot of it has to do with stereotypes, myths that we have to debunk about STEM fields. So it's a lot of work to be done, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, that was number 7 on our top 10 ranking here of the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. That was Christina Serrano, who's a professor of IT at Colorado State University, talking about more the human side of change, the psychology of change, and that's back in episode number 59. You could listen to that entire interview as well as other interviews from that same episode. Again, episode number 59 with Christina Serrano. Be sure to check that out if you like that topic. So we are going to actually transition into a similar discussion with another person, the second of 2 people in our top 10 list that are from the world of academia. Although he is also a consultant, he is primarily a professor at the University of Potsdam, and he does a lot of research as it relates to digital transformation. By the way, University of Potsdam is in Germany, so I wanted to get someone with a global perspective as well. And he does a lot of analytical, quantitative research of digital transformations in Eastern Europe. So I wanted to have him on the show to bring that global perspective and more of the quantitative, academic, research-based view of digital transformation, which a lot of my experience and our team's experience is primarily experiential. It's qualitative. It's great stuff for sure, but it's not necessarily grounded in academic research. So we thought it'd be a good sort of counterbalance or an augmentation to the qualitative, experiential types of discussions we typically have on the show. And so that made his discussion particularly interesting. and we're going to have him on the show. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71, the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com. and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. This is the top 10 ranking of the top interviews of 2022 so far on the show. And we're up to number 6 on our countdown here, and he is the second of 2 academic types on our show. You heard at number 7, Christina Serrano from Colorado State University, which, by the way, is very close to where Third Stage Consulting is based. It's about less than 100 miles from where our office is, so very close to home in our case, as far as our U.S. headquarters, our global headquarters in the U.S. But for this next guest, the second academic type that's going to be on the show is Norbert Gronau from University of Potsdam, and he is a professor at University of Potsdam in Germany, and other side of the world or other continent, different perspective. He does a lot of research, quantitative research, to understand digital transformations in Eastern Europe primarily, although a lot of the data and a lot of the research he's done is very applicable in all parts of the world. So that's really why I wanted to have him on the show, is to bring that global Eastern European perspective, but also draw out some of the lessons that apply to any part of the world and some of the lessons learned and best practices that he's uncovered in his research as it relates to digital transformation in any part of the world. So this is back from episode number 51 when we had Norbert Gronau on the show talking about some of his digital transformation research and KPIs, key performance indicators and measures. Let's roll the clip of Norbert Gronau talking about digital transformation research. For you then is maybe just give us a little bit of an overview of some of this research you've done over the years. What does it look like? What were you trying to find? What was the impetus for the whole thing?
Yeah, we started 20 years ago when I was invited to a big German car parts manufacturer. He makes the gearboxes, and I was asked, we have a tiny requirement to change in our information system. I don't say the name of the vendor, but it's one of the main vendors of ERP systems in the world, and it's not coming from the US but from Germany. We have a tiny new requirement, a very tiny requirement, and it costs us millions, literally millions of dollars or euros to fix this tiny requirement. Can't there be a more adaptive, we coined the word adaptive or changeable enterprise system that is much easier to adapt to new requirements. So that was our first task in research, and we came up with a lot of ideas how new architectures of ERP systems should be provided. But to make it short, nearly none of these ideas is made it into practice because we have this relational database paradigm, and we have some applications running on application servers, and the data models grow and grow and grow, and the data itself also grows. And so the systems are becoming complex and more complex and even more complex. And when you read about missing success with implementing new ERP systems, that's partly also a problem of the complexity. And there are even some people outside that think interfaces between different systems are bad, and you should try to integrate everything into one single system. That I don't know whom that helps, but it does not help conquer or even manage the complexity. So that was the first task. And then we started another thing that we are continuing to do. We count beans, not beans, but numbers of installations of ERP systems in the German-speaking market. German-speaking market is about 120 million people, so it's not very big, but a lot of small and medium-sized ERP vendors are located in these German-speaking countries. I mentioned one. I didn't mention it by name, but I mentioned it by the place of birth in Germany, in Waldorf, Germany, one of the big vendors stemming from there. It's a huge one, the SAP, but there are many, more than 300, 400 smaller ones. And then later, when we looked into other countries, we see these small vendors in nearly every other country, whether it's South Africa, it's the UK, it's the United States. You can sustain an ERP business as a vendor when you have 30 to 50 people working for you. Then it's sustainable. It will not grow, and it will not adapt all new technologies and business opportunities very fast, but you can survive. And so we have the situation that we have 300 different ERP systems, and that's part of my consultancy to find out which is the best long-term. Long-term means at least for 10 years for my customers. Yeah, and on the other hand, perhaps we will come to that as well. On the other hand, the vendors are also the small and medium-sized vendors ask me and my team at the university. I have about 45 people running or working for me at the university, and they ask me. We read about new technologies like AI. Now the main technology where what I can overview, the ERP vendors make some investments in. The main technology is AI, artificial intelligence. So they desperately try to make more use of the huge amount of data they collected. But we see, and we can come to it in a minute, we see that there are, of course, some other capabilities required, not only technology, not only developers, but some other capabilities are required. So this is, we see the technology, we see the process, we see the business advantages, all the business disadvantages, and you prepared some very nice questions. What are the issues? What do I recommend? Perhaps we come to that later. Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess just to start then, that's a helpful overview of sort of the two threads or the two main drivers of why you started this research and what problem you were trying to solve or what questions you were trying to answer. But when you look at just ERP implementations, digital transformations in general, what were some of the, you've been doing this a long time, but what are some of the biggest findings you have, whether they're quantitative or qualitative findings from your research? What are some of the biggest lessons?
We can distinguish several phases. In the first phase, it was just automation. No, it was not even automation. It was just bringing manual processes to computerized processes. Not very much automation, but you wanted to have your data on a computer to be able to be accessed from anywhere and from more people than before. That was the first phase. That went till I would say the early 2000s. So then there came a phase of consolidation because there was not so much innovation in the ERP area, more functionality, yes, and more specific data models, yes, but no innovation. Then many managers in companies came to the conclusion ERP is quite expensive, and we can cut cost on ERP. We can lift. We do not need a maintenance contract. We do not need upgrades anymore. We do not need qualified people in our company, but we can always call India for support. And this is the second phase. We see that a lot of competitive advantage vanished in this period of time, and since I would say 3 to 5 years we have the third phase, and this is the taking the ERP system as the backbone of the business information processing and trying to implement innovation like AI, like big data, like analytics and so on, and but not only into ERP, but in other systems connected to the ERP landscape. And this is the third phase. And this makes more fun, of course, because if you always have cost-cutting discussions, that's no fun at all, because it does not end with the vendor. It also comes to you as a consultant. But if you see companies that want to spend money to improve their competitive ability with IT, then the fun starts. And then then Corona came, the COVID virus. Then in some companies the fun just stopped again. But we have some e-tailers, so e-commerce retailers that did very well during the COVID pandemic, and they spent tremendous amounts of money to improve their competitive ability and to make their processes better. And that's the third stage. Well, yeah, your company is also named, but this is a parallel I didn't think of before. This stems from our observation of nearly 2,000 ERP projects in the last 20 years in the German-speaking countries. So these 3 stages, and now we are in a fun state on the one hand, last sentence, but on the other hand, some companies that thought IT is not important, people that know of IT are not important, they don't do well now. They have problems. They have real problems now.
Interesting. So the 3 phases, then you had the first stage, which was the sort of the initial automation. Second stage,
computerization. I would call it computerization. It's Okay. Now we can talk. We can speak of automation, but in the first years it was just computerization.
Yeah. Just taking manual processes and moving them to computers.
Yeah.
Second stage was cutting costs, but potentially at the expense of also cutting value, business value.
Yeah.
And then the third stage now is the sort of the competitive advantages using digital to further their business models. What are in this third stage that you're seeing now in the last 3 to 5 years? What are some of the big findings? I mean, what are what are some of the trends or some of the data sets or high level metrics that really stand out or jump out from your research?
I see the AI trend, artificial intelligence trend, is more a trend for vendors for now. It's not where the customers, my customers from the industry ask me what can we use AI, and I tell them, well, you need the data, you need the models for prediction, and you need the use cases, and then you can start. And when we look at the data, it's this master data management topic is some topic that does not work well in most companies. So they have very individualistic data sets, and AI in the ERP area doesn't work well with very scarce data sets. The AI works well when you have millions of unique data, but not when you have there a little bit and there a little bit, and no bridge between it. So that's one of the problems. What we have a question here from the audience about value, the value of ERP and the value of these investments. So what we always try to do is to calculate the value of the investment. We do this of the ERP or the IT technology investment. We do this while we compare the actual state with the old processes and the old functions with the intended state, when we have automated processes and when we have all system functionality available. Because that is sometimes different when you use a system with a huge functionality. You have more functions, but system is sometimes also more expensive. And on the other hand, you can get a lot of improvements, like in manufacturing and logistics, when you use a smaller and cheaper system. So, and we compare this, and when you compare this, then you always can come up with some productivity gains, with the opportunity to reach more revenues or to cut cost on stocks and things like that. And that is, there are some sums that are big. So big means 6 or 7 figures, and some are very small. And of course, no company we investigate has more than 20 ROI potentials in their processes, but otherwise they would no longer exist when they had 100. Or we always go into the company with about 300 or 400 questions about ROI. Always covering one single functionality, and 20 turn out as valid, and then we can sum it up and come up with some information about the potential value. And this is in one case, the investment is 7 million over 7 years, 7 million, and we can compare euro and US dollar here for this interview. 7 million in 7 years, and the yearly return on investment is about 2.5 million euro. So that means in 3 years, your 7 years costs are covered, and then you are not only even, but you are better than before. This information is quite necessary for some of the companies, because they have to report to boards or to owners, or they're publicly noted, and then they have to figure out they have to justify their investment in IT, because money is always scarce, and everybody in manufacturing loves to buy new machines, because you can see the machine for 5 million. Even if the machine is not running, you at least have the machine standing in your factory. But a new enterprise system, a new IT, you do not see anything. You see a new icon on your browser, and this is 2 million euro or $2 million for a new icon. That's quite expensive. So it's absolutely necessary that you need to calculate the business value, and we have some experience with that, with this calculating the value. Unfortunately, not all our customers want to have us calculating the value. Some say, well, it's self-evident that we need a new system, and then we calculate the cost, or the vendor calculates the cost of the new system, and then they say, well, it's quite expensive, and can't we come up with another solution? And then we wished we had calculated also the business value. So business value is quite important, and it's possible to calculate it, but you need a little bit of experience for that.
Okay, that was Norbert Gronau from University of Potsdam in Germany. That interview was back from episode number 51, where he talked for a little over an hour, a little under an hour perhaps, talking about some of his research and lessons learned and some of the insights gleaned from his research into digital transformations in Eastern Europe. Although, again, those lessons that he talks about are very relevant to transformation in any part of the world. So that another great interview. Again, that's on episode number 51 if you want to go check out the full interview there. So we are going to go to another part of the world for our next guest after we take a quick break. We're up to number 5 now, getting into the top half of our top 10 ranking here. And the topic at hand is going to be related to system integrators and how to hold them accountable and how to manage those system integrators better. And for that discussion, we're going to go to South Africa. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll play you that interview that is at number 5 of the top 10 ranking of the top interviews of Transformation Ground Control 2022 so far. We'll be right back with more. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. This is the top 10 ranking of the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far on this show. And we are up to the top half now of the top 10 list. We're in the top 5. So these are really the cream of the crop, the best of the best. And we just had, prior to the break, we had our guest from Germany on the show, or featured a clip from the guest from Germany who talked about some of his research in academia out of Germany. And now we're going to shift gears, go to a different continent, go to South Africa. And this is an interview we did back in episode number 54 with Clifford Martin, who is the head of Third Stage Consulting Africa's office out of Cape Town, South Africa. And not only is he from a different part of the world, but he has a global perspective, certainly, of how transformations throughout the world work and what some of the things to watch out for are and what some of the key success factors are. And in particular, one of the topics that he and I share a passion for is this topic of how to hold your system integrator accountable. How do you manage the system integrator? How do you ensure that you are driving the system integrator and not letting the system integrator drive you and your business? In other words, how do you ensure that your business needs are front and center and the system integrator supporting those business needs rather than forcing or force-fitting a cookie-cutter approach that a system integrator might have that may not be aligned with what your needs are and what your goals and objectives are. So that's a fascinating topic to me, and as it is with Clifford, and so we wanted to put our heads together to talk about some of these topics as it relates to how to manage SIs, how to hold them accountable, how to ensure that they're aligned with your business needs, what to do if they get off track or if they start to build too much or if they bring in the junior consultants that don't know what they're doing. How do you ensure that you get that level of accountability, transparency, alignment, all that stuff you need out of your system integrator? So we really wanted to dive into that topic. So back in episode number 54, we had Clifford on the show to talk about that and other things related to managing system integrators. Let's roll the clip from episode number 54 with Clifford Martin.
But I guess just to start, Clifford, throughout Africa, just like other parts of the world, and you're based in Africa, but I think you and I both have more of a global view of just how these sorts of projects and massive transformations work. But whether it's Africa or any other part of the world, there's a number of failures that are caused or can be directly linked back to a failure to provide oversight and management of the system integrator. What are some examples of those sorts of failure points, or maybe just help us unpack a little bit? What are some of the risks or challenges that are inherent in these sorts of relationships between organization and their system integrator that oftentimes leads to failure? What are some examples or some of those higher priority examples that come to mind?
Yes, no, thank you for that question, Eric. So I think, inherently we're in an industry that is focused on, I think, primarily two things, selling software and installing software. And often the misalignment in expectations between the industry that we operate in and the client's own expectations. And I deliberately use the word software installation. And perhaps I'm being a little bit harsh to their size, but essentially that is what they do. And I think often an organization is expecting a strategic partner, someone that's going to walk the full journey with them from, let's say, from business case to business benefit, and he's going to be them and guide them throughout that. And very often that's not the case. The primary focus of the SI is to deploy the software. And I think there's often that expectation gap and a failure on the part of the client then to properly manage the SI and ensure that they get out of the deal what they're expecting, and often what the marketing material has promised them. So perhaps to start, then perhaps let me just add a little caveat to that. You know, SI's playing an essential role. It's, you know, and I'm not kind of trying to diss them in any way. They do play an essential role. And certainly the ERP projects that have an SI on board are much more likely to be successful because they do bring structure and focus and a certain discipline and methodology. But once again, they do need to be managed. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not that people want their projects to fail, obviously, and it's not that they want the relationships to get sideways, but oftentimes they do. Why do you think that is? I mean, what are some of the, just in your experience, what are some of the root causes of why you think organizations struggle so much with that relationship and managing those system integrators, holding them accountable, and really extracting the value they bring to the table, but not letting it get out of hand or go off the rails? What are some of the reasons for that?
Yes, I think there are issues on both sides of the fence. And by that, I mean both in terms of how the manner in which the SI constructs and approaches the particular ERP or digital transformation project, as well as on the client side in terms of the capabilities that they require to ensure success. And very often, just a definition, a common understanding of what constitutes success, or for that matter, what constitutes failure, is not present, and there's no common agreement around that. Certainly nothing embedded into the contract that talks to success. So I do think there are failures on both sides, and as you correctly state, one can never outsource accountability for success. That has to reside with the client. I think we all know and accept that, but so often it's not the case. So often it's sometimes, I think, convenient for the client to kind of pass that buck to the SI and expect them to drive success. And then I think, Eric, what I find it to be extremely important is the whole contract negotiation, and what are we actually bringing the SI on board to do? Because SI contracts, and I've reviewed many of the tier 1 SI contracts, they're pretty standard. And I think the client needs to understand what the SI will not be doing. There are certain capabilities that, and we can unpack that in a bit more detail as we go through the conversation. But there's certain capabilities that they simply do not bring to the party. And standard SI contracts are primarily framed in technology terms, and the deliverables are framed in technology terms. Whereas very often what the client is trying to do is to achieve some business outcome, some improved operational experience, or bringing new business capabilities to the party, or enabling their strategic objectives, whatever the case may be. So there's this disjoint between the two, and I think if clients do not very forcefully ensure that the SI statement of work talks to what they're wanting out of the project, we already start off from a place where there are these misaligned expectations, and it's very difficult to bring that together thereafter.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there around the fact that, you know, technical deliverables aren't necessarily what organizations are trying to get out of these transformations at the end of the day. It's certainly a key part of the output. You need those deliverables, but there's a lot more to it than just delivering a system that works from a technical perspective. So I think that sort of myopic focus that system integrators have, which is why you hire them, by the way. You hire them because they have that depth of knowledge. They know the software really well, whatever software it is you're deploying. But it's the other stuff outside the technology that ultimately makes the project successful, whether it's, you know, the process improvement or the change management, the architecture and data migration, the overall program management. And that's typically stuff that the system integrators don't bring to the table. It also seems like that a lot of times, tell me if you agree with this or if you have thoughts on this, but it seems like also there's a sort of two other dynamics at play when organizations are managing their system integrators. First of all, the organizations typically aren't experts in whatever sort of deployment you're doing or any sort of digital transformation, which is why they've hired the system integrators. So there's on one hand, you can understand why you hire the system integrators. They're there to sort of fill the competency gap that you don't have internally. But that lack of knowledge and that lack of experience can lead to sort of a blind management of the system integrator, which can be challenging. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a dynamic you've seen as well?
Yeah, such a good point, Eric. And my first action point is, if I engage a new client, is to have some type of executive boot camp. Because we kind of assume that the executive understands what a typical transformation or ERP journey looks like. What are some of the critical phases and deliverables, some of the critical decisions that they will be called upon to make throughout this journey. And they don't, and it's probably unfair to expect them to do that. And if you look at the average ERP or digital steering committee, we kind of take the different managers of the different business domains or lines of business and kind of bundle them together into a steering committee and expect them to oversee and drive success. And I think that's unreasonable. So one has to ensure that the executive is educated on their oversight role. And let me also say that, how we define these ERP transformational journeys, the default from their side is going to be defined as primarily software installation or a technology project at the very least. And I think the executive's role is to take a full life cycle perspective on this and look beyond. Deployment of the solution is not success. It's, as you correctly say, it's an enabler. So we now have the enabling technology in place, but exactly how we're going to leverage that in support of the business objectives is something that the executive need to play long after the SIs popped the champagne cork, declared victory, and moved on to the next project. So I think executive education and ensuring that they stay in the game is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need to know, it's not that you or I would suggest that an organization needs to become an expert in digital transformation before they embark on one, because that doesn't make sense and that's not realistic. But you need to educate yourself enough to know, at least enough to know what kind of questions to ask, how to push back or challenge assumptions that SIs might have. They've got their cookie cutter boilerplate approach that may or may not fit with your needs. And ultimately, it's up to you to say, hey, these parts of your methodology or your approach works, but here's what we think we need to do to modify to fit our situation. And that could be, cultural nuances. If you're a risk adverse organization, for example, and you just move slowly as an organization, you can't just come in and force fit a fast deployment. You've got to sort of right size it for your organization, just as one example. So I think just knowing enough about these implementations, being self-aware to know how we can kind of meld these two competencies together, our own internal competencies with the system integrators. I think that's a big, an important point as well.
Yeah. And perhaps I can add to that in terms of if we're talking about capabilities within the client organization. One often finds vendor management to be quite poor, or at least not at a mature level where they can effectively manage their SI and hold them to account. And just having that kind of level of professional skepticism, you talk about pushback, absolutely, because we do know that the SI part of their agenda is going to be to drive additional revenue, often through change requests or customizations or additional functionality. So having that professional skepticism to push back and ask, is this really necessary? Is this within the scope? What are the implications of this? Is it priority? Can we do it post-deployment? Is extremely important. And then the vendor management, I think is, and let me add to that as well, a third capability, program management, especially when there are multiple SIs involved or multiple projects within a broader program. It's so important that the client organization has a mature program management capability, typical a PMO office, in order to pull that all together and orchestrate it and drive the integration and ensure that there's at least a common approach, common methodologies towards a common integrated goal. So I would say those three capabilities: the executive know-how, and oversight, the vendor management capability to kind of manage the SI, and then the program management capability from a delivery perspective to pull this all together.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. Just before we keep going with the questions here, just to give you a quick overview of who's where people are joining from today, I'd ask the question to open up, where are you joining? And I ask people to drop that in the chat. Just a few examples here. We have someone here from Florida State University in Florida. We've got someone from North Carolina. We have someone joining on LinkedIn from South Carolina in the United States, Columbus, Ohio in the United States, as well as an international audience, as I mentioned, too. We've got someone here from Toronto, someone joining from the UK, Brooklyn, New York, which is not international, at least where I'm at, but still a global audience, and someone from Kuwait and India, just as a few examples of where people are joining from today. So thanks everyone for joining and letting us know where you're at today, and whichever platform you're watching on. Again, feel free to drop any questions you have for Clifford or I as it relates to this topic, and we'll get to those here in just a moment. So some of the issues you've just talked about, Clifford, why do you think they're so prevalent, not just in Africa where you're at, not just in the United States where I'm at, but throughout the world? Why is this such a global challenge? It doesn't seem to be something that's just, pockets of the world are struggling with it. It seems to be a pretty global problem. So why is that? What would you say the root causes are?
Yes, Eric, yeah, it's interesting. It is prevalent, and I find it very interesting that the same issues that we're discussing now, if we were having this discussion 5 or 10 years ago, we'd probably cover a lot of the same ground. Yeah. So these things seem to be perpetuated. But nevertheless, we need to also understand that SIs have tremendously powerful marketing machines. They come with a very strong, experienced team. They have a very slick approach in terms of engaging and embedding themselves within organizations. And I don't mean this as an affront to SIs. SIs will do what SIs do. I think it's incumbent upon the client to manage that, as with any vendor or partner, or with any type of project within the organization. So I do find it both frustrating and interesting that it seems to be very similar issues, that the technology changes, but the issues tend to stay the same. And I do think that, if we just take contract negotiation as one example, you have a tier one vendor with a big team often sitting in the background of technical people, attorneys, legal input, senior partners negotiating, and you have some poor guy in procurement who's probably never done this before in his life representing the client organization. It's an absolute total mismatch, So somehow these issues do seem to continue. Exactly what the answer is, I don't know. But I do think that, given in the last few years we've had a number of high public, certainly in this part of the world, failures in the ERP, in the transformation space. It's public knowledge. It's been in the public space. Some of the big tier one consulting houses have been involved. So I certainly think that organizations are kind of waking up to the fact that they have to take control of these projects. They have to be a lot more skeptical. They have to interrogate things in a lot more detail, and manage it a lot closer. So whilst I say that the issues seem to continue at the same time, and let's face it, I think what one also sees is that organizations appointing third parties to provide some independent program assurance and advice on an ongoing basis and assist them in this space. So whilst things stay the same, there is some positive news, and I think there is some positive things happening in terms of better managing SIs.
That was a clip of our interview with Clifford Martin back from episode number 54, talking about how to hold your system integrator accountable and how to manage your system integrator. You can listen to that full episode by going back to episode number 54. So I encourage you to check that out. So we're going to shift gears a bit, and after a break, we're going to move on to number 4 in our top 10 list. And this is I'll give you a little hint here. This was an interview that sort of got lost in the shuffle because it was the first episode that came out in the new year, which in many ways is the worst time to release a new podcast episode because people are coming back from the holidays and end-of-year holidays, Christmas, New Year's celebrations, that sort of thing in much of the world. And this episode, quite frankly, got lost in the shuffle a bit, although I will say this interview and this episode in particular was our highest performing and our most listened to, most downloaded episode in the audio podcast platform of any show we've ever done, which is part of why it comes in at number 4. And just another hint as to what the topic is, it's something we haven't covered yet in this top 10 list, which is Fintech. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get to that number 4 interview in our ranking of the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. This is the ranking of the top 10 interviews of this podcast so far in 2022. And we've sifted through dozens of interviews we've done so far this year and really honed in and narrowed it down to the top 10 of the year so far. And this next interview is going back to episode number 50, which was the first episode we released in 2022. And in some ways, the episode got lost, at least on LinkedIn and YouTube, where people watched the episode. It didn't do as well when it first came out, although it has picked up traction since then and gotten a lot more views. However, it was and still is the most popular episode that we've ever released in the audio podcast platform. So of all the episodes we've put out, 70 episodes so far, this is episode number 71. Episode number 50 was our most downloaded episode of all time so far. And not just by a little, it was by a lot. This is by far our most popular episode on Apple, Spotify, Google, all the audio podcast platforms. And the topic at hand was Fintech in the mid-market and how to manage financial transformations, and really more of a finance-centric discussion as it relates to technology. And for that interview, we had Dan Maurice, who's an executive vice president at PNC Bank, which is a bank based out of North America. We're trying to, again, back in the global theme here. We've had Europe, we've had South Africa, we've had certainly North America. We'll have some guests coming up from Asia Pacific as well. So we've really tried to cover guests from all over the world, and this guest is from North America, PNC Bank. It's Dan Maurice talking about Fintech and financial transformations in the mid-market, back from episode number 50. Let's roll the clip. You and I know each other on a personal level. Our kids one of our sons go to the same high school here in Denver, Colorado, where we're both based. But you recently invited me to a little meeting or a lunch and learn sort of event that you were hosting at PNC. And you covered a lot of really cool topics related to trends in the fintech space, and just a lot of really cool stuff, which is actually part of what sparked this conversation, this live stream. And in that, you did talk about a lot of trends, or the group talked a lot about a lot of trends in the fintech space. So maybe just to summarize for the audience, what are some of the general trends that you're seeing in the fintech or financial technology space?
Yeah, so I would say, Eric, over the last several years, the financial services industry has evolved its offerings to meet the demands of customers' expectations and security needs. And, we're all very familiar with the coronavirus pandemic, and just the impact of that pandemic has really compounded the need for innovative, user-centric digital solutions. And this is, it's likely going to be an inflection point for the financial services industry. And this is both for consumers and for businesses. And, we, as I said, PNC operates in all, I shouldn't say all, but most areas of the financial services industry. And, we've, there's a lot of financial technology companies out there. And that's kind of where this conversation sparked from. And I will say, from a banking perspective, it's kind of been an evolution over time on how these financial technologies were viewed from the banking industry. And I'll just talk through that, that kind of evolution, because, initially as they first started coming out, banks, we viewed these fintechs as competition. If you think about it, they would, they're very innovative, and they would focus on a single challenge that maybe a business or an individual was trying to solve for, and they would solve for that individual challenge. Their focus has always been on the user experience and creating simple user experiences. We all demand simple. In our personal lives, we're used to simple. We've all got our phones where you can, do just about anything with a couple of clicks. And those personal experiences, we have the same expectations in our business lives as well. And, as we talked about that competition, I'll tell you, banks, we tried to solve for everything. We would look at a situation, we'd try to build solutions that would solve for every customer need. But if you think about the range of consumers to, all the way up to multinational large corporates, there's a lot of different things to solve for. So, we tried to be everything for everyone. And so, like I said, it kind of started out as a competitive environment. What I will say is that evolution, it has really evolved into partnerships. And where, the financial technology companies, which I'm just going to call Fintech for short, we talked about, they had great solutions that solved these individual problems. And, one of the things that they lacked was a distribution channel, because these are, generally speaking, smaller organizations, startups with great ideas, great solutions. So, we've got the Fintech here with the great solutions. Then you've got, the banking side. We looked at it. Okay, so we've got the distribution channels. We've got the strict due diligence due to our regulated industry, which also gives us the credibility with all of those companies and individuals that we have, that we have access and connections with. And we realize that, while banks can't build for everything, there was a great benefit to partnering. We've got the Fintech with the solution, we've got the bank with the distribution channel and the credibility. So then we started looking at how do we partner together to get these solutions out there. And then, taking it even one step further, we've got banks that are now implementing their own incubators for aspiring ideas and aspiring companies. And, what I can say, at PNC, we have an incubator we call Numo. And it's a place where we look at unsolved business problems and we look at ways to solve those problems with some of the emerging technologies that are out there. And I would say this, this overall evolution of customer behavior, it's really why we've been focused on making treasury management, let's call it less transactional and more transformational. So that's kind of the evolution of where things have been and the trends that we're seeing in, just in the space in general.
Sure. What about, so you talk about these very specific problems that these fintech startups are trying to solve, and how, they're not trying to be everything to everyone. They're usually a little bit smaller, more niche, more focused. Whether it's Numo or that you mentioned just a moment ago, or other types of technologies, what are, just in general, what are some of those sort of micro focused areas that these technologies are trying to solve? Because when I think of like AP, I think of AR, but these are, I think, a little bit different sorts of technologies. Maybe could you give us some examples of what types of technologies there are?
Yeah, well, my gosh, they're countless. They fit into everything. They're things that we don't even realize are taking place. One that's, I'll give an example of one that's kind of, evolved fairly recently as a result of, kind of let's call it the Great Resignation. Companies are struggling with retaining and attracting talent. So anything that an organization can do to differentiate themselves from their competition, they're going to do it. So, you think about, why do we all go to work? We all go to work to get paid. And, the problem with pay is, okay, say for instance, like you're paid every 2 weeks, like you've earned that money, but you're not going to get it paid for 2 weeks. So people have, you fall on hard times. You're at the grocery store and you realize you don't have enough money in your checking account to pay for your groceries. You have more groceries than what you have in your account, but that you've earned the money from your employer. So, this is earned wage access is something that's new to help solve for that. And basically what it is, it gives employees the ability to go online or look at an app on their phone and say, I've worked 5 days, I've earned $1,000, but I'm not going to get paid for another week. It's almost like I don't want to call it an advance, but because it's your money, you can get paid that money right now on the spot. That's been a huge evolution here, fairly recently, and a lot of work has been done in that space. There's countless other examples, but it's that one I would say is probably one that's gaining a lot of traction right now.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is going beyond just your typical accounts payable processing, accounts receivable. I mean, you're getting into sort of solving, I guess, not just business problems, but also consumer problems too. Is the scope of fintech? Is it consumer based and business based? Is it kind of covering both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about, just think about, like transferring money from, if we go out to dinner and I want to you pick up the bill and I want to pay you my half for it. I mean, there's apps that will allow you to split those bills. Just if I want to send you money directly, I can leverage the Zelle network as a consumer to send you money on that. There's, and as you look at Zelle, it was originally person to person, and now that's expanded for, business to consumer. It's, just a network where banks are actually partnering together to make it easier for people to transfer money.
Very cool. Good. So when you look at the mid-market, which is where I know, from what I understand, PNC focuses on the mid-market, and our company, Third Stage Consulting, focuses on the mid-market as well. So we sort of have that common target audience or target market on the business side. How do these sorts of technologies that you're talking about, how do they help these mid-market companies grow, or how can they help them grow?
Yeah, so, I think the biggest thing is, these are, things like this, solutions like this allow companies to focus on what their core competencies are. You think about, how do you make money as an organization? And, this is almost like, let's look at it as, like outsourcing or leveraging technology instead of people to complete routine, non-core tasks so that your organization can focus more of your resources on the activities that make them money. We talked about the Great Resignation, like trying to differentiate from an employee standpoint. This gives an opportunity to make the work that people do more rewarding. So they're not focused on these non-core, or I shouldn't say non-core, but maybe repetitive and non-exciting, not rewarding tasks. It makes the work more rewarding, where people can focus on those things that are more value added, and more in line with the strategic vision of the organization. I think it also, we talked about, replicating our personal experiences, everything that we can do from our phone, those simple experiences. I'll probably come back to that a couple times, but giving employees the same simple experiences that in their business lives that they're used to in their personal lives, and just what we've come to expect. And I think about, retention. I'll come back to that a lot, because every organization I talk to, every company I talk to, that's the, one of the biggest things they're trying to solve for. But I've seen people, I'm sure you've seen people too, that have made decisions to leave organizations because they felt it was just, the work was too manual, things were too disorganized. It just wasn't the experience that they wanted to. So they figured they'd go somewhere else and try something different. So, it's a retention thing as well. And these examples, I mean, that's really, that it underscores kind of what we've been focused on as an organization. And I'll talk for a little bit about PNC. One task in specific when it comes to finance is cash forecasting. And, up until fairly recently, cash forecasting has been a very manual, labor-intensive, time-consuming process. What we've done here is just leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, company historical data. We've developed a way that you can actually streamline that whole process. We call it Pinnacle Cash Forecasting, but the goal of the whole project was to give treasurers and organizations more time to actually use the the cash forecasting versus just spending time building it. So, that's really, it's making people more effective and efficient in their jobs.
And they can spend more time thinking and analyzing versus trying to figure out what the forecast is and manually collecting all that data or manually pulling it all together.
Yeah. Spreadsheets, listen, Excel is great, but it takes a lot of work to do that stuff. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So we want those folks focused on strategy.
Yeah, especially if you're a CFO or a controller or kind of a high level finance or accounting person. That's what you should be doing. Yeah. Now, what about when an organization is going through any sort of financial transformation, whether it be technology changes or process changes, organizational changes, or all of the above? What are some of the biggest risks that you see and that your customers are seeing?
I think there's a couple things. I think the biggest one that I see frequently is the misperception that adding technology will fix a broken process. Just simply adding technology into a broken process sometimes it can, but a majority of the time it's not going to fix a broken process. Really what needs to be done is, organizations need to address the inefficiencies in the process, like find out where the problems actually exist. That's going to give you a much better picture of where those problems are, and then you can look to supplement or fix those problems, like fix the problems first and then supplement with technology. Because what you could end up doing is just adding technology to a broken process, which just compounds the problem. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've seen, and I don't know, this is fairly recently, but trying to incorporate too many different technologies or too many vendors into a process. For instance, like let's just say that you've got 6 different technologies to help solve a problem. If something breaks within that process, like you think about your employees, your staff, they're not really going to know who to call. And you end up in a situation where there could potentially be a lot of finger pointing. Nobody wants to say that it's my problem. They're going to say that it's somewhere else in the process. And if you're just trying to fix the thing and you don't know who to call, can get extremely frustrating for people. Another challenge by having too many different technology is you start running into integration issues. One thing may not talk to another just exactly how you want it to. That kind of ties back to the same thing with 6 different technologies, and I'm just using that as a random example, but you run into those integration issues when things don't talk to each other, and the end result is the opposite of that simple experience that we're really going for. Right. The other is, just making sure that you vet out what you're really looking for and what you're trying to solve for. And, let's call it the strength and stability of who you're working with. There is a lot of consolidation in the space, in the fintech space specifically, because there's new organizations popping up every day. And somebody may come up with the best solution for the single problem that you have, and you may end up going down a path and you might buy that technology to fix that problem. Only find out 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road, that organization gets acquired because they did such a great job, but the acquiring company decides that, this isn't going to be one of our core areas, and they just they stop supporting that particular piece. So, then you're left looking for another one. So I would say making sure that you vet out, who you're going with. It's really important. And, I will say, like, these are the issues, like these things that we've seen. That's exactly why we've been investing significantly in our capabilities at PNC, just trying to build a platform that's nimble, that's secure, that's seamless for our clients. The incubator is, that's a big part of why we developed that incubator, so that so companies don't have to try to figure out, like, who should we work with. Let the banks do the vetting. We're heavily regulated, so let us vet these companies out, and then you kind of help yourself out a little bit. So
yeah.
And listen, like these things that I'm sharing with you right now, that's not always the case. Like there's some there's some great organizations. I mean, it's just amazing what's being developed. So it's a very, for in the payment space, it's very exciting.
Yeah. All right. That interview was with Dan Maurice of PNC Bank talking about fintech and financial transformation. You can find that complete interview back in episode number 50, which was the first episode we released in 2022. And again, as I mentioned before, the most popular audio version of our podcast that we've released so far. So that is a big reason why the interview with Dan is at number 4 on our list. So we're going to shift gears a bit, move away from fintech and get back to the people side of change. And this guest is someone that's fairly well known. I think he's very well known, but maybe not as well known as the organization he works for. And he's going to be on talking about change management. So that's the only hint I'm going to give you for now. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll tell you who it really is. When we come back from a quick break, you're listening to Transformation Ground Control's Top 10 Interviews of 2022 so far. We'll be right back.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. This is the top 10 ranking of the top interviews of 2022 so far. We're into the top 3 now, and 3 is a somewhat of a superstitious number for me because of the company that I founded and work for, which is called Third Stage. So anytime I see the number 3, it sort of triggers a very strong reaction from me, whether it's an athlete that wears the number 3 jersey or you're doing a top 10 ranking, you get to number 3. Number 3 always has a special place and meaning in my heart for that reason. And so number 3 is a very special place to be. Not only in the top 3, you're pretty close to number 1. And this is a guest that I loved having on the show. I actually tried for a while to get him on the show. He's a very busy person, pretty well-known person, does a lot of thought leadership and speaking, which is why he was somewhat difficult to nail down on the show. But he was very gracious and did a great interview. I really liked this interview. This is Tim Creasy, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at ProSci. And if you don't know what ProSci is an organization that provides training and certification for organizational change management professionals, both consultants and internal people that are going through any sort of change or involved in any sort of change. And ProSci has become somewhat of a gold standard for those that are trying to further their careers within change management or just learn about change management or just effectively manage change. So I wanted to have him on the show to talk about change management, and more specifically the future of change management, where we are now with the world of change management and where we're headed. And one of the reasons I really like this discussion is partly because he has such a strong following that we got a lot of engagement in this interview, in this episode. He's a very good interviewee. He's just really good at storytelling. Just the way he speaks. I'm a big fan of the way he speaks, the inflection of his voice, and just I'll let you see for yourself, but there's a lot to like about this interview. And this is Tim Creasy back in episode number 55. Here's a clip of him talking with me about the future of change management. Let's roll the clip. Kind of turning to the audience here, just where some of the people are joining from today. We've got Justin from Pittsburgh. Thanks for being here, Justin. Robert is the one on LinkedIn who's watching on a treadmill, which is great multitasking. Talking about leading change, you've got to be able to multitask, and that's a good demonstration of it there. Dubai, we've got a couple people from Denver. So thanks for being here. We've got Ukraine. I won't show and list them all, but there's a global audience here. I know we've got Dubai in here as well. Ghana, Spokane, Washington, UAE again, as well as another one from Denver and Africa as well. So Thanks for being here today. And in fact, one of the just kind of an interesting comment that just came up here on LinkedIn is just you can't lead big changes without ProSci. And that's a great testimony for someone who, by the way, also answered that they are certified in ProSci. So I guess, maybe just to start, when you look at the ProSci program and you guys deal with these organizations all over the world, and by the way, before I get into this question, and this relates to a comment here that's on LinkedIn, you guys are you offer this on a global scale, right? As far as the training, we've got a comment here that ProSci needs to step into Africa, but I believe you can get certified from Africa. Can you not?
Yeah, ProSci has, again, humble beginnings, right? In a small warehouse in northern Colorado is kind of where I started. We now have a physical footprint in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Caribbean, Latin America, and Spain and Portugal. But there is an affiliate network around the entire globe where you can access ProSci training programs. So within Africa, we have several partners. And if you Google ProSci Global Partner Network, you'll track down information about Cedar and Change, our friends that are down that way.
Great. So I guess just to jump into here about the problem statement that you guys are trying to solve with ProSci, and that is that change is hard in general. Or if this was easy, you and I probably wouldn't be in business, quite frankly. You and I would probably you'd be in economics, and I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be this probably. So change is hard. Organizations struggle with it. Why is that? You've seen so many organizations, you've certified so many people that are thirsting for learning about change, but why is it such a difficult discipline?
Well, I think it gets back to that notion, and I've been talking about the two sides of the change coin, right? That there's a technical side of every change where we design, develop, and deliver a solution that meets the need, the issue, the opportunity in front of us. You do a lot of work with your clients doing ERPs, right? That's one flavor of technical solution. CRMs would be electronic health records in a hospital, merger, acquisition. Even a new value system is a technical side of a change, right? The people side of the change is how do we get people to embrace, adopt, and use whatever that solution is. And although in this change discipline, if you've been a practitioner and you hear it called the soft side of change, it just makes your skin crawl, right? Because I think the reason it's hard, Eric, is that this is the harder side of change. The technical side of change can be incredibly complex. Merging two big organizations, absolutely. There's technical complexity in terms of pulling this financial systems together, branding, blah, blah, blah. The real hard side of the change is getting people to step into this new way of working. It's helping individuals navigate, step out of where they are today, step through whatever that transition, the liminal movement is going to be, and step into that new way of being. And so I think the reason it's hard is because the people side of change is the harder side of change. Now, historically, in a value system where your employees were incented for just, asking how high when you told them to jump, predictability, consistency, that was the value system historically. Change was easier then because the values aligned with asking somebody to do something different. But new value systems over the last 20 years, the emergence of, the interaction economy out of the service and knowledge economy, these things have all amplified the people side of change as something that we cannot just leave up to giving the right commands, but it's really around helping people navigate that journey. And I know we're going to end up talking about the pandemic too, but the pandemic just amplified. It made the people side of change impossible to ignore. If you were one of those organizations or projects that did ignore it and leave the people side of change to chance, historically.
Yeah. Now, because we have a global audience, it might be worth asking, a lot of those dynamics you just described, as far as the difficulty of changing and the fact that in the past, maybe you could say jump and people just say how high, and that's not so much the case in today's organizational cultures. Do you see differences in different parts of the world or just differing organizational cultures and how these ProSci concepts are applied or how they navigate change in general? Or how does that affect, either a global culture and or an organizational culture? How does that affect, your change journey?
Yeah, I think you're spot on because I think culture is critically important. I do get a little bit provocative here. I'll say that culture is never the villain when a change fails, and it's never the hero when a change succeeds. We're big Marvel fans at our house, right? So culture is neither Thanos nor Captain America. Culture is. It's the water in which we're swimming. And so I think great change practitioners, it's their job to understand, adapt, and adjust to the culture into which they're bringing to life this particular change. So I guess kind of that's my first bent. I do think culture, certainly we get geographic variation in culture, but inside of organizations, we also get tremendous variation of culture, just because of the values, behaviors, beliefs. We unpacked this with research. This is kind of an interesting full circle notion of kind of the story of ProSci, where we have an attunement to the market, an understanding that change agents would like to better understand the culture they're stepping into and how it impacts the change journey they're about to attempt to navigate. And so we looked at a number of the different studies, the work that was done on organizational cultures, and came up with 6 cultural dimensions that impact how change comes to life. Because my other beef on the culture equation is that any of this kind of value laden, like good culture, bad culture, culture is, and if it's not aligned with what you're trying to achieve as an organization, then you need to go about nudging the culture. But it's so that's, I hate the good bad stuff kind of drives me crazy. So instead we went spectrums, because change is going to come to life different, right? So you take the first one would be, let's say, uncertainty avoidance as a spectrum. Some organizations have a very low uncertainty avoidance, a high tolerance of ambiguity. Others have the flip side, right? Neither is good nor bad, but they impact how change comes to life. And so we built a body of research that's contained in the ProSci, body of knowledge that says, for each of these 6 cultural dimensions, individualism, collectivism, what are the challenges of bringing to life change in an individualistic culture? And what are the adaptations you need to make as a change practitioner? What about for a collective culture, right? Power distance. Is the organization this high or this high in terms of the orientation of where people think they need to get permission? Neither good nor bad, but this organization requires different change tactics than this organization. And so that's what we've built out in the research, is this whole set of, for each of these dimensions, what are the challenges and adaptations you would make depending on where you live in that cultural phenomenon. Culture is going to be really fascinating going forward, I think, because, I've spoke a lot the last couple of years about the involuntary digital transformation. Mm-hmm. That's what happened in March of 2020, right? For all the talk of all the executives, of all the clients you help, right, about digital transformation leading up to March 2020, they were mostly enamored with the technological revolution. And then all of a sudden we saw the digital transformation happen during this instantaneous work from home experiment. The cultural transformation that organizations have in front of them cannot be allowed to be involuntary, right? We need to make sure that we step out in front of shaping the organizations that we want to live in and be part of as organizations going forward.
Yeah, it creates that thing that change initiatives oftentimes have historically struggled with, which is that burning platform for change. Like, if I'm an employee working for you, Tim, why do I need to change? I mean, why do we need to change? Why are you doing this to me? That sort of thing. And it sort of takes that conversation off the table and makes it a little less personal and more like we're all kind of in this together, and we're all trying to figure out how to navigate this new post-pandemic world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Just a couple of comments here. One that's sort of relevant to what we were just talking about, and that is from Malcolm on LinkedIn. So his comment here is that many companies will happily spend money on consultancy and technology. And there's part 2 here, but not on education. Why? And training. How? So I guess that begs a question, or maybe I'll sort of spin that into a question that it triggered is, so companies are spending all this money on technology because they have to, or, it's that involuntary transformation that you're talking about. They spend all this money, in many cases, tens of millions of dollars for a larger organization, maybe even more for a really big one. So, but they're not spending a lot of them are not spending adequate time and money on the education and the overall change management. It sort of goes back to my first question. Why is that? I mean, is it a blind spot of executives? They just don't understand anything beyond the soft side of change that you were talking about, or what do you think that dynamic is?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And to build on Malcolm's comment, the other one that we watch organizations fall into is we never find the money to spend to do it right the first time.
Yeah.
But we always find the money to do it the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth time. And so I think a lot of this is around getting smarter with how we're going to implement change and position change in the organization. One of the things we started to do, Eric, back in about 2013, 14, we introduced our ROI of change management, a calculator, a whole frame. But I wrote a paper one time. I never published it. I think I should. It's about, for human beings to make sense of anything, we need context and contrast. So here's a new idea that I'm trying to help you understand. Context is how does it relate to the stuff around it. Contrast is how is it similar or different to something I already know. And I think when we talk about the value of change management, we've unfortunately done it in absence of the context of the real value it's going to create. And so we started to really work to shift this language to I started using the phrase people-dependent project ROI. What percentage of the project's ROI depends on people adopting and using the solution? It's somewhere between 0 and 100%. And one of my biggest pet peeves in the entire world is when people use the word literally incorrectly. But if you want to watch a project leader's gears or a senior leader's gears start to turn, ask them what percentage of this project's ROI depends on people adopting and using the change. And for our most important, most strategic projects, that number is 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, right? Out of the gate. And then we can ask the second question, which is what are we investing in driving the adoption and usage of the solution? And often we have $500 for mouse pads and coffee mugs. And so we've created that cognitive dissonance, right? That so much of the value of the change depends on adoption and usage, but historically we've not right-sized our investment in supporting the adoption and usage of that change. And I think, Eric, this is, a couple of my fun turns of phrase here that I played with is getting past the head nod. So that's one, right? Because 20 years ago when ProSci was really at the beginning of that change management journey, change management was still kind of the crazies in the corner. We hadn't even got the head nod. But over the last 10, 15 years, things have certainly shifted. And so now you're like, we need some change management on this. And, oh, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. And I need an hour on the agenda. Whoa. You need an hour of my time? I told you this change management stuff sounded good, right? And so getting past the head nod is that, it sounds good until, no, you need me to do something different. And that's where we test. Are we dealing with a passive buy-in? I'm passively bought into change management, or active buy-in by that senior leader, that they're willing to take the steps and make the investment to support the adoption and usage of the change. The other positional shift that we'll work at here is, that change management's an investment, not an expense.
Yeah.
If we see it as an expense line, it gets LIFO'd all the time. And do you have any supply chain background?
Yeah.
I don't know if the audience does. LIFO is last in, first out. Or it's a way to manage inventory. It's also, unfortunately, what happens to change management on the agenda, on the budget. That if we've not anchored our value to the achievement of the project ROI, we're the last on the budget, the first off the budget. Last on the agenda, first off the agenda. But as soon as we start to anchor to the percentage delivery of that project ROI, that's the position shifter. I was working with this team, Eric. So a team in an IT, right? IT project team rolling out a big project. We sat down with them and we all did the CMROI calculator. So the change management ROI calculator. We go through and you put in all of the benefits and objectives of the project, how people dependent each one is. You do this big weighting. Out at the end comes the number 62%. So the team collectively arrived at a calculation that 62% of the project ROI depended on adoption and usage. And I'm not a betting man, but I would put money on the fact that it's not 62%, right?
Higher.
Just based purely on statistics, it's more likely 61 or 63 or 60 or 64, or like just a normal distribution. But all of a sudden they had a label, right? And they began talking about the 62% in meetings. How are we doing on the 62%? Do we think we're lined up? Are we ready to, do we have that part of the organization moving to make sure we capture the 62%? They had a label for this concept of the people dependent portion of the project ROI. And it unlocked the conversations. It unlocked the way that they began to intentionally engage the people in the organization, because it wasn't just a communication and a training plan anymore. It was, what do we do to make sure we capture the 62% of this transformational technology we're rolling out? And so that context shifting, I think, is where we get out of the, is it nice to have? Maybe. I also think the pandemic proved that change management is not a nice to have anymore as well, right?
Yeah. It disrupted people's worlds in a way that I think a lot of people can sort of see it and feel it and understand it a little bit better. But you bring up a really interesting point that I hadn't thought of before, which is that you're talking about, hanging your hat or being able to latch onto a number like that 65%, or whatever the number is for any organization. It's X% of the business value is tied to people. And I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of organizations struggle with the inverse of that, which is sort of what you were saying before, which is the soft nature of change management. And that a lot of times an organization will look at a hard dollar figure, like this transformation is going to cost us $10 million. Let's just say we're going to pay $10 million for new technology and a system integrator to implement it. That to them, that's a very real number. But then you start saying, well, and then we're going to spend $500,000, $1 million on change management. Then it's like, well, back to your LIFO point, or we could cut that $1 million and only spend $10 million instead of 11. But the problem is that $10 million that's not a real number. It's a number, but that number is not going to materialize that way if you don't invest in change management. So that's the other thing too, is like, it's not just value you're trying to get. It's also even more short-sighted than that. It's like, just that $10 million could quickly turn into $20 million if you don't spend that $1 million or whatever the number is on change management. And so it's like, I find too, you've got to counter that same concept you just described. You have to counter that on the cost side of other non-people aspects of the change as well. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. Before? Oh, for sure. Because you know what the two most costly letters in the project world are?
What?
R and E. Rescope, redesign, retrain, revisit, replatform, reteam, retreat, resign, right?
So that was a clip from the interview with Tim Creasy of ProSci talking about the future of change management. That's going back to episode number 55. So if you want to hear that full interview, I encourage you to check that out. There's a lot we didn't get to in this clip we just played for you that you will hear back in episode number 55, where the audience that was listening to that interview live asked a lot of questions. We had a ton of questions that came out, especially toward the end of the interview. So I encourage you to go back to episode number 55, listen to that full interview with Tim, and check that out. So we're up to our top two interviews here. We've got two left. And our next one is going to shift gears again. We're doing sort of another 180 here. We're moving away from just the people side of change and getting into, let's call it Industry 4.0 and manufacturing automation. That's sort of the focus. Very good speaker and guest that is more recent in one of the real recent episodes of Transformation Ground Control. I'll tell you who it is when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. We're here talking about, or playing you clips from the top 10 ranking of the top interviews of 2022 so far. And in this number 2 slot, we have someone that was actually on just a couple episodes ago. We've done 70 episodes so far. This is number 71 that you're listening to now. This is just going back a couple weeks to episode number 68, when we had Walker Reynolds from, he's part of two different organizations, 4.0 Solutions and also Intellic, which is a Industry 4.0 system integrator. Both organizations, both companies he works for are his companies, and they both do Industry 4.0 and manufacturing type stuff. So I wanted to have him on the show to talk about Industry 4.0. And Walker Reynolds, who's the CEO of 4.0 Solutions, has a strong following. He has a very popular YouTube channel, and that's actually how I found him. I have a fairly popular YouTube channel, as does he, and we sort of cross paths on YouTube and really like his style. I think we have similar communication styles and similar ways of trying to dumb down or to bring complex buzzwords and stuff that doesn't mean anything, bring it down to reality and make meaning of it. I think that's something that he and I share in common. And so really enjoyed the conversation with him. He has a good following. We had a lot of great engagement in the live stream interview that we did with him, which is why it's at number 2. And if I had to rank the interviews based on personal stories and personal backgrounds, I'd for sure put him at number 1 if we were only basing it on that. He has an amazing, tragic and heartbreaking story in some ways, but in other ways, the way he positions it and describes it, as you'll hear in the full interview, he turns it into a positive. So you're not going to get the full story in the clip. That you'll have to listen to the full episode back in episode number 68, but I want to play you a clip here where he talks about some of the essence of what we wanted to cover with him, which is Industry 4.0 and how manufacturers can really make that jump into the future of digital transformation. So let's roll the clip with Walker Reynolds, who's number 2 in our ranking of top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. But just to start here, just to maybe set some context, you mentioned Industry 3.0 and Industry 4.0 throughout the conversation so far. Maybe just help us understand, what is Industry 4.0 and how is that different from the way things worked back in the 80s when you were talking about Industry 3.0?
So yeah, so very important to note, Industry 4.0, the term actually started out in the early 2000s. There's a holy war in our industry. What is Industry 4.0? There is a camp that says Industry 4.0 is the specification written by the EU to tell manufacturers how to use data, right? How to capture data and use data. And there's this whole maturity model, and it starts with computerization and all this stuff. That's all horseshit. It didn't work. The EU all says it didn't work. In fact, the EU, there's all reports now that says, listen, this was that standard wasn't worth the paper it was written on. That doesn't mean that the people who wrote it don't know what they're doing. It was that they just took the wrong step first. That's all it was. Industry 4.0 starts with education, right? That's what it is. What is Industry 4.0? It's the fourth industrial revolution. As a sociologist, what I know is that our industrial revolutions they're not something human beings created. They are a natural evolution of progress. Period. If you create intelligence on another life, on another planet, and they're not human beings, they will go through 5 industrial revolutions. Okay, we know they'll go through 5 and they'll happen at the exact same interval, and they'll happen in the exact same order. So the third industrial revolution was the automation of manufacturing processes. So if we start with number one, Industry 1.0 was really the steam engine. Industry 2.0 was the assembly line. Industry 3.0 was the automation of industrial processes. It was the automation of the equipment that's in the assembly line.
Right.
That was done 2 ways. Number 1, relay logic, which is just wires and ice cube relays, and number 2, with computers. And at the back end of Industry 3.0, you put programmable logic controllers on all these machines, and those programmable logic controllers created massive amounts of data. The fourth, but nobody captured it.
Right.
They didn't know what to do with it. The data is on the equipment, and there are tens of thousands of events, right? So what is data? It's something that happened and when it happened. Digital data means it's 99.99999% accurate, and it comes from a smart thing. The fourth industrial revolution really started right around 2000, and it was the ability to collect the data and transform it into information so that you could automate business processes. So the fourth industrial revolution is just this space and time that we're in. Now, it's important to understand Moore's law, which is Moore's law applies when it comes to the industrial revolutions, which is each industrial revolution, each subsequent revolution is half as long as its previous one. Okay. So the fourth industrial revolution is only running from about the year 2020 or 2000 to 2032, give or take, ballpark. Okay. The fifth industrial revolution, which will be augmented reality and virtual reality, that is, we're walking around with a heads-up display, and every physical thing we look at, we have digital data over, will be in both the metaverse and in the real world at the exact same time. That's the fifth industrial revolution, right? That will start right around 2032 for real, in earnest. Okay. So most manufacturers have another 10-year window to get this to become a smart company. Okay. To become a smart company. And then by extension, from a smart company, become a data company. All manufacturers, full stop, during the fourth industrial revolution will have one of three things happen to them. Number one, they will go out of business. Okay. Number two, they will get acquired by another company who becomes smart. Or number three, they will become a data company. I see this thing on Twitter all the time. These stock analysts, Tesla's overpriced, right? Here, Tesla's worth $1 trillion. Well, not today, but it will be again, right? So Tesla's worth $1 trillion. The next 10 biggest auto manufacturers combined are worth $1 trillion. Does anyone think Tesla's overpriced? And my answer is, hell no, you're an idiot. Tesla's not a car company. Tesla is not a car company. They are a data company who makes cars. Their primary commodity is the Gigafactory, which doesn't have to make cars. It can make anything. The Gigafactory is designed to make anything. Okay. It is an infrastructure. Giga is an infrastructure. It's not a manufacturing facility. It's not deterministic. Okay. And number two, they're a data company. The car is merely the vessel through which Tesla collects its most valuable commodity, which is data. If you don't become like that, you are dead. That is what the fourth industrial revolution is. And it wasn't possible really until about 2000. We needed networks, we needed smart things, and we needed software to put it all together. And that's when it happened.
Right. So it's interesting to hear you sort of put that in context, not just the historical context, the context of where we are today, but also where we're headed in the future from 2032 on with Industry 5.0. That's super interesting. And it's interesting to think about those organizations that are still stuck in Industry 3.0. You think of all the companies out there, and I imagine you probably consult with a lot of them too, that they haven't even come close to getting to Industry 4.0, which is a prerequisite, by the way, to getting to 5.0. You can't just, I assume you're not just going to jump from 3.0 to 5.0 someday and just wait till that next wave.
Nope. You have to become a smart company in order to become a data company. And you have to be a data company to go through the fifth industrial revolution. And the question is, what do manufacturers have to do? And you know, honestly, it's not that hard. I mean, it's painful, but it's not that hard. There's a playbook for doing it. The problem is that the playbook that the most of the OEMs that manufacturers are going to are not going to OEMs who give a shit about your digital strategy. They're not even asking you about your digital strategy. What they're looking for is a list of projects they can work on, use cases. But if you don't put all of those projects, those use cases, all the problems you're going to solve within the context of a much larger digital strategy on a common technology filtered through minimum technical requirements so that you can create an ecosystem, which is the industrial internet of things. If you can't create a common ecosystem on common technology, you're wasting your money. And so who should you not go to? If you're going to Rockwell and you're asking Rockwell Automation, and if you have a partnership with Rockwell, I apologize. But if you're going to Rockwell Automation and you're saying, hey, Rockwell, come in and consult with us and give us the connected enterprise, you're screwed. Full stop. You're not going to find a single architect who doesn't work for Rockwell who isn't going to tell you the same thing I just told you. Okay. If you're doing that, what you're getting is a solution. You're getting a Rockwell solution. Okay. Right. What you need is think of it as a quilt. Your technical infrastructure is a quilt of all the best solutions from all OEMs connected together on common technology. That's what we teach using a concept called the unified namespace. So, but manufacturers, this isn't that hard. You become a smart company over the course of a 3 to 5 year window. And that's connect, collect, store, analyze, visualize, find patterns, predict, report, solve. Once you're a smart company, then you plug into a digital supply chain. So instead of just talking to the links upstream and downstream from you, you're talking to all the links, including the links you don't work with yet. That is what smart companies do. Smart companies make products that get better after you buy them, and they plug into a digital supply chain. It's simply that simple. So if you're a manufacturer watching this, or you work for a manufacturer watching this, you need to ask yourself, are we on that path? Is that where we're going? And if not, you're dying. It's just that simple.
Yeah. You're falling further and further behind.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so I've got a few comments I want to get to here, and then a question too from the audience. But first of all, I have to hit a few comments here. I don't think it's pretty clear that your personal story and your personal mission has resonated and struck a chord with the audience here. Someone from LinkedIn, it doesn't show the name, says, "I'm sorry it happened to you as a child, but totally agree. Those horrible experiences make you stronger." Parisa on LinkedIn also says that's an inspiring mission. With passion, there's nothing that can stop you, which I totally agree with. And then another comment here that extreme childhood trauma to make good in the world. Amazing. So I think that's a really cool story.
And I'd like to give Zach Scriven, who's my digital media strategist, credit here. For a very long time, I didn't talk about this story. Everybody in my circle knew about it, and I would talk about it, and they knew it. I talked to my employees and everybody, but publicly, I didn't talk about that story.
Yeah, Zach, that's hard to talk about. I imagine that's probably not the easiest thing to bring up.
Zach said there's a video we shot a couple of years ago where I'm walking through a marina in upstate New York, and it's the story of Walker Reynolds. And Zach is saying, listen, you need to tell your life story. And he wanted me to do this for months. And I kept saying, Zach, no one cares about that. It doesn't go to this. And Zach insisted over and over and over again, you're wrong. You're wrong. It's a key part of how you've gotten to where you are, and you have to tell that part of it. The audience needs that context. So I want to give Zach all the credit, because it was never my idea to ever even mention it. But now when that question does come up, I do tell that part of the story, and it's because Zach insisted, hey, that context is important. So Zach, thank you, brother.
But it's a reminder too that we all, being in the professional services space as you and I are, we're all human, and we want to work with humans, and flawed or not, or the imperfections that go along with that. And
that's authenticity. That's authenticity. That's it's Americans crave authenticity because there is so much. I don't want to say fakeness. It's not that. There's so much production in the world, right? I think fake is too hard of a word. I think we crave authenticity, and the interesting thing is the nature of work is changing, right? It used to be like when our career started, and I'm assuming, Eric, you're around my age, right? So when our career started, there were clear lines in the sand between work and home, right? You were either at home or you were at work, and this is home time and this is work time. That's changing. It has changed. You are always at work and you are always at home. And so therefore, the values that you have at home need to merge into the values you have at work. So now what I encourage people to do when they're going to find an employer, it's not benefits and income, and I don't even talk about any of that stuff. What I talk about is you need to go find an employer who shares the values you have, and they don't just write it down and put it, it's a mission statement that they don't really work towards, or it's values they don't really have. You need to ask questions about real values, because you're always going to be at work. Right. And you're always going to be at home. And that's the nature of what I think drives us towards authenticity. Is we want authenticity at home. We expect it at home. And because we're always at work and always at home in this new economy, we need authenticity at work as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's really well said. Here's a comment I want to sort of springboard into a question for you, Walker. And this is from Michael on YouTube. He says, absolutely resonates with me in Mexico. As the southern neighbor of the U.S., it is good for both countries that Mexico gets rich and becomes a better customer of U.S. products and services. Yep. So I guess just to maybe back up a little bit and turn that into a question as it relates to the more global scale here. How does everything you're talking about, as far as the wanting to help the middle class and the
Did we lose Eric?
Whole U.S. centric mission of sorts.
So the answer is this. Michael Dowdell, the guy who asked the question, we know Michael. I know what company he works for. He's a visionary thought leader. The customers that Michael works with in Mexico, the vast majority of them are suppliers for American companies. Okay. And American consumers are consuming the goods, for the most part, are consuming the goods from the suppliers, that the sub-assemblies that go into the finished goods that Michael serves. Though they don't go anywhere. Those suppliers don't go anywhere. Those suppliers start making products that are bought in Mexico through a thriving middle class that is grown in Mexico. What we did by offshoring supply chain into Mexico is we created the infrastructure for Mexico to have their supply chain for the consumer economy. That's the difference. The difference is that we create new suppliers here in the United States who are manufacturing the goods, as a function of logistics, manufacturing the sub-assemblies that go into the finished goods. But here's the fundamental difference. This is the biggest key difference. Operations analysis. And if you look at our clients have manufacturing facilities all over the world, but they no longer have manufacturing facilities all over the world to manufacture goods as cheaply as possible to sell them in the United States for the biggest margins. No, they manufacture in China to sell in China. They manufacture in Mexico to sell in Mexico. They manufacture in Costa Rica to sell in South America. But what do they do? What do they do with the data they collect in those manufacturing facilities? They aggregate it in a common infrastructure, and they use US-based engineers, data scientists, and operations analysts to optimize their manufacturing operations in their offshore facilities. That's the new economy for the United States. Why? Because as an industrial nation, the United States, Germany, Japan, all Western Europe, Germany, Japan, United States as the three key leaders, we're so far ahead of other industrial economies. Our economy transforms as a fourth industrial or an industry 4.0 economy before Mexico's does, right? Mexico, but one of the things, some interesting things about countries like Mexico, we had to go through the physical infrastructure first. We needed a lot of copper all over our country, right? Telephone lines, Ethernet cables. Countries like Mexico don't need that. Africa doesn't need that. India doesn't need that. Now it's all 5G. They'll be able to put infrastructure in place much, much faster than we did. And so they will catch up at the speed of light to where the Western Europe is, the United States is, Germany, Japan, et cetera.
That's super interesting. I never connected those two data points into that context. That's a really interesting point. So that was number 2 in our ranking of top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. That's Walker Reynolds from 4.0 Solutions and Intellic, which is Intellic is a Industry 4.0 system integrator. 4.0 Solutions is an Industry 4.0 education and coaching sort of organization, and he's part of both of those organizations. And that's him talking about the future of manufacturing technology, Industry 4.0, smart factories, all that stuff. You can listen to the whole interview, including his full personal story and his mission into how he got into the world of manufacturing, which is a fascinating story. Go back to episode number 68, and you can listen to that full interview. So we are to the number 1 spot. And the only hint I'm really going to give you for number 1 is that it's not based on any one topic. And there's actually several guests in this interview. And it's actually it's the most recent of all the people on our top 10 list, or all the interviews in our top 10 list. It's actually the most recent episode of the podcast that I'm drawing this from. But I'll tell you who it is or who these people are, and I'll play you a clip of the interview with these people. When we come back after a quick break, you're listening to Transformation Ground Control's ranking of the top 10 interviews of 2022 so far. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 Replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Bad to the bone. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 71. We're counting down the top 10 interviews of this podcast so far, and we are up to the number 1 spot. And this is, I would say, this is hands down the most fun I had doing an interview of any of the interviews in the top 10 list, or any of the interviews this year so far, and maybe even my favorite interview that I've done yet in the entire year and a half we've been doing the show. And the reason it was so much fun is because I wanted to try something totally different, and I was trying to get out of this rut of having guests on who are very knowledgeable, very good guests, as we've seen in the top 10 list so far. But I wanted to move away from sort of a more of an academic Q&A discussion, which is very helpful, nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to mix it up. I was just feeling a little bored, to be candid. I was getting kind of bored with the format. So I thought, why don't we do a different format? And actually, one of our directors of strategy and transformation, Adam Cheatham, from our team here in the U.S., had the idea of why not do sort of a game show format or something kind of fun like that. And I loved the idea. I took it, ran with it, tried it out. I had no idea how it was going to go, but it turned out to be really fun. I think the panel had a lot of fun. The audience got really engaged because we did it in a live stream format. And so we had several guests. I invited a number of people. Ironically, Adam, whose idea it was to do this format, wasn't available to be on the live stream or in the panel discussion because of previous commitments. But we had a number of other people that were able to participate from the Third Stage team. So we had, in this panel discussion, we had 6 other people. We had Nate Strower, who's a practice lead at Third Stage Consulting. We had Greg Benton, who's our Chief Strategy Officer at Third Stage. We had Teresa Richardson, who is a Director of Strategy and Transformation at Third Stage. Michelle Weiss, who's a Senior Manager at Third Stage. Clifford Martin, who is the head of our South Africa practice. And you may recall that he was the interview that was at number, I already forgot what number he was. He was number 6, I want to say. No, he was number 5, I'm sorry. Back at number 5, you may recall that Clifford Martin was at number 5, where he talked about holding system integrators accountable. He's in the panel discussion as well, as was Kyler Cheatham, who is my co-host of Transformation Ground Control. So we had the 6 of them on the show. We did a live stream. We got a lot of audience questions. And so what we wanted to do is, instead of having a deep dive discussion on a specific topic, I didn't tell the panel discussion or the panelists what questions I was going to ask. I gave them no heads up advance warning. I ask them a question, I give them time to write it down, and then they show their answers. We run through the answers, and we might elaborate on 1 or 2 of those responses. Anything that looks surprising or interesting, we'll kind of dive into. But the idea was meant to be more of a quicker paced, faster paced, fun format that wasn't requiring so much mental commitment from the listeners. And it was still value add, though. We still wanted to get into best practices and what makes projects succeed, what the biggest risks are, biggest reasons why they fail, most important change management tactic. Those are the sorts of questions that I asked in this live stream. So I'll play you the clip here, which was actually hard to choose one clip because so much of it was so interesting and good. But this clip, we'll play you a clip from that discussion, which is actually back from episode number 69, which was just a couple weeks ago from the time this episode is coming out. So episode number 69, we had a consulting panel discussion, sort of a game show format minus the keeping score and minus giving out prizes, although, who knows, maybe we'll transition to that format later on. But we'll play you a clip here of the consulting panel discussion of digital transformation best practices. This is very strategic, high-level stuff, and so we covered a lot of ground in this conversation. Let's play a clip from that number one interview, which is the consulting panel discussion back from episode number 69. So just to sort of get started on things here with this format, what we wanted to do, again, we're going to go through a lightning round. We're going to get the panel responses here. We're going to get audience responses to each of these questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the panel just a few seconds to respond to each of these questions, and then we'll ask the audience as well. But the first question I have for the panelists here, and again, just sort of in the theme of giving a broad-based view of what makes digital transformation successful, just to kick things off, first question I have for the panelists here is, what is the biggest key to digital transformation success? So if you could just write it down and Teresa already had her answer ready. In fact, we were joking before we went live that your answer to everything is probably going to be change management. The question is, it's just change management. That's all it is.
Efficiency.
All right, so I'm actually just going to run around here, and it looks like we've got a few responses already. So Nate says buy-in is important. That's definitely a good one. Similarly, Michelle says executive support. Teresa says change management. Greg says clearly understood objectives for change. And then Clifford says defining transformation. Very good responses. So I guess I'm going to pick on you, Teresa, just to elaborate a little bit why. And I'm only asking you this because I know you already had that piece of paper pre-written with change management.
For everything.
So why change management? Why do you think that's the most important thing?
It's important because, in my opinion, the entire organization needs to buy into it. They need to adopt it and use it. If you spend millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on a transformation and nobody uses it, you have a problem. So in order for it to be accepted and take hold, the organization needs to understand it. They need to buy into it. They need to support it. They need to be involved in the process and use it.
Makes total sense. And then Greg, can you show your response again? I think you had, was it clearly defined goals and objectives?
Yeah, yep. Many times organizations go into the idea that they're going to digitally transform. They really don't have it well defined. They really don't have the objectives for the outcome of that digital transformation. In other words, if we implement all of the technology, the people, the process changes that Teresa was talking about, what is our return going to be? What is the organization going to look like in a year, in 5 years? And I think very often organizations don't put enough planning up front or strategy up front into what's going to be needed to accomplish that change. And not just paving cow paths, as we say, with the new technology, but actually changing the organization for the better.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, what you're saying actually helps enable some of the other stuff, like executive support, the buy-in that Nate and Michelle talked about. Certainly, change management can be more effective when you have clearly defined goals and objectives. I'd also be curious from the audience, which one of these panelists do you agree with? Do you disagree? Or what did we miss? What would you add to the mix? I'd love to hear from the audience here in terms of what you think the most important key to digital transformation success is. So please feel free to drop in the chat. Also, as we're going here, if you have questions you want to ask the panel, be happy to take those as well. They don't know what's coming anyway, so we might as well take some audience questions as well. So please feel free to chime in with any questions you want to ask here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question here. And it's somewhat similar, but we're sort of flipping it a little bit from the previous question. And that is, what is the number one reason why digital transformations fail?
Oh man, how much paper do you guys have?
Teresa, one piece of paper, apparently.
It's all right. It fits. She didn't even bring a pen. She just already had that prepared. She just I've been prepared since last night. All right.
And actually, before we get to all the responses here, I'm gonna show a comment here that we had on YouTube, and their response here on YouTube was defining the transformation for the business and for people. So that was an interesting point of feedback, and I agree with that. People, the better they understand what the goals and objectives are, the better off it's going to be. All right. So the number one reason why they fail, Nate, you said lack of vision or goals. Clifford says misaligned expectations. Michelle says wrong people driving change. Interesting. Come back to that one. Teresa said, "Oh, what?
Change management."
Wait, change management. And then wait, Greg has a balloon. How did you? Well, I have a lot of questions.
Inflated expectations. I like it.
That's
great. I didn't know these questions were going to come up, but I did have the balloon.
That is awesome.
You
I
just
can't
have
wait to see what other prompts you
just
might
in
have.
case you need it, like to burst someone's bubble. You just have spare balloons laying around. That's funny.
Right.
That's super funny. So, Michelle, show me your response again. I remember I wanted to come back to it. No, I already forgot what you said, but it was really good. We lost. Hold on 1 second here.
While Michelle's queuing up, just a reminder for our audience, Michelle represents all of our Latin American clients down there. So, Michelle, if you want to say hi to our Spanish speakers in language, definitely feel free to answer anything in Spanish today.
Okay, I will.
Hola. That's about as much.
Thank you for that lesson, Eric.
I used to have a boss that said, I know how to speak Spanish. Salsa, taco, guacamole. I'm like, that's not Spanish. I'm sorry.
All the essentials, definitely.
So the wrong people driving change. Explain what you mean by that, Michelle, or why that's a risk or a failure point for transformations.
What I was getting at is sometimes the people that are driving the change aren't the people that the workers, feel like they want to follow or, respect. So I know that that's happened in a couple of projects where the people that are driving that change aren't actually the ones that are respected by the organization. And so.
Right. Like they don't have credibility or
credibility, that type of thing. But they get put on a project anyway, just because maybe they have the time or they have a certain role, but it doesn't mean that the people that need to change are going to necessarily want to because of the people that are driving it.
So the people driving change, do you ever see where the people that are responsible for driving change are the ones that are most stuck in the past? Like they don't want to drive the change, or they want to drive their definition of change that maybe doesn't align with the overall goals and objectives, or what have you seen there?
More that, people just decide not to do it because they don't respect the person, or the person doesn't have the power to really, drive that change. So I think selecting the right people to manage that, or to make sure that they're communicating down to the people that are having to do the change, having those people well selected is really important. So that's why I put that answer.
Gotcha. So here's a comment or question that I think only you can help us with, Michelle.
Yeah. I was like, no, people are talking to us in Spanish. So.
Las personas equivocadas impulsan el cambio. Yeah. So, Elias is saying that, the wrong people are the ones pushing the change. So it's kind of the same thing that I'm saying.
Nice. So we've got some Spanish translation happening in the chat, which is perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for that comment.
My glasses to read that little small name, so I apologize if I butchered that.
It is hard to read for sure. And then, Greg, we had to come back to it. Your prop is highly effective, as is the message on your balloon prop. But the comment here is inflated expectations is the best answer with balloon. But so at least one person watching agrees with you, Greg. Tell us what you mean by that, or why is inflated expectations? Why is that a problem, or how does that lead to failure?
Well, I think that people believe that going into a digital transformation means that everything will come out on the other end as a technology change without any real effort, and support the organization in the way that is envisioned going forward. And that often comes with a lack of clear transformational plan, objectives, and even the governance internally to make that happen. And very often the strategy piece and really understanding where you want to go as an organization, this kind of goes along with what do you see as success for digital transformation, is understanding what change is going to happen and how it's going to affect the organization and the return on investment as a result.
Gotcha. Yep. Makes total sense. And I agree with that. There's a lot of, that seems to be a root cause for a lot of other problems that people mistakenly think is the real cause of failure. For example, change management, back to Teresa's point, if I have unrealistic expectations, chances are fairly high I'm going to cut change management because I had unrealistic expectations and I need to force fit my project into a timeline or budget. So you end up cutting something like change management, and then you blame change management for the reason why the project failed, when really maybe it was because you had unrealistic expectations all along. So that was the number one interview on our top 10 list here. And this is obviously the midpoint for 2022. There's a lot of interviews left to happen this year. Who knows how this top 10 list will evolve and shake up over the next half of the year. But, our job and our goal is to make these 10 interviews become obsolete or not nearly as good as the next top 10 list we do. So our goal is to continuously outdo each other and outdo ourselves every time we do a new episode. So I hope you enjoyed this top 10 list, and I hope you enjoyed this format of sort of giving a flyover view of sort of the best of. Anytime we've done this best of or top 10 ranking format in past episodes, those tend to be pretty popular. They tend to be our most popular episodes. So hopefully that's the case here today, and I hope we found it of value. And I encourage you to check out the podcast if this is your first time listening, or if you haven't listened to all the episodes. I encourage you just to go back and look at all the different topics we've covered. You may not have time to listen to all 70 episodes that we've done so far, but there's probably a handful of episodes that any one of you listening right now will find a lot of value in. So I encourage you to go check out some of those episodes and, cherry pick the interviews that look most interesting to you, listen to partial episodes, whatever you want to do. We put it all out there so you can digest at your leisure and at your pace and all that good stuff. So I encourage you to check that out and be sure to subscribe to the show too. If you have any, if you haven't subscribed yet on YouTube or on whatever audio podcast platform you listen, be sure to subscribe and check us out there, and also leave us a review. And also, even more importantly, if you could just share the show with other people that you work with, peers, people on your project team. If you're part of a consulting organization, share it with your peers, other consultants, your clients. Love to get the word out and love to share this content with anyone you think might find it of value. So I want to thank you for listening in here again this week. This is episode number 71. This is the top 10 ranking of the interview so far. We'll get back to our normal interview formats with some creative twists starting again next week, and we're going to try and continue to bring on better and better guests and more diverse guests over time and different formats, and we'll keep providing value however we can. So thanks for listening. Hope you're having a great summer so far. For those of you in the northern hemisphere that are entering summer, I hope you have a great summer and your summer's off to a great start so far. Holiday season, if that's where you're headed in your part of the world, I hope you're having a great holiday season, and hope you're having a great week wherever you are and whenever you're listening. My name is Eric Kimberling. This is Transformation Ground Control. We'll see you next time. Thank you and take care.